"It's a trap," she screamed, throwing herself into the beam of 22 headlights. Stop the bikes, they're going to kill all of you." The lead motorcycle skidded to a halt less than 3 feet from her body. Behind it, 21 engines cut through the frozen Nevada air in a staggered chain of squealing rubber and hot exhaust. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. And in that silence, the girl with the torn jacket and the cracked prepaid phone held up a screen that read, "22 angels, no witnesses after midnight." Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels now. Let's go back to that highway. The temperature had dropped below, freezing an hour before the 22 riders left the outskirts of Red Mesa, Nevada, but none of them felt the cold the way they normally would have. They had something warm pushing through them, not anger exactly, but close. The controlled heat of men who have been stolen from, lied about, and maneuvered into a corner, and are finally riding toward what they believe will be a reckoning. Grant Grizzly Mercer led the column from the front. 49 years old, former Army mechanic, club president of the Hells Angels, chapter that called the high desert east of Reno its territory for the better part of 2 decades. His hands on the handlebars were the hands of a man who had repaired broken engines in temperatures that would crack metal, and they were absolutely steady. He had briefed his riders 3 times before they left. He had walked through every possibility he could imagine. He had not imagined her. The freight depot sat roughly 4 miles past a narrow railway underpass, a concrete throat carved under an old Union Pacific line, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass each other, long enough that you couldn't see daylight from the entrance. Grant had ridden through it 100 times in his life. It was the kind of structure you stopped noticing after a while, because nothing had ever happened there. That was about to change. Calvin Rourke had reached out to the club 3 days earlier through an intermediary nobody could immediately identify as a problem. Rourke ran Rourke Freight and Salvage out of a converted warehouse on the eastern edge of Red Mesa, a legitimate-looking operation that moved equipment, scrap metal, and industrial supplies through a web of regional contracts. He had a firm handshake and a campaign donation history that kept local officials comfortable around him. He told the intermediary that he had recovered several motorcycles stolen from the club's garage 6 weeks earlier, that he had come across them through a storage auction he'd unknowingly purchased, and that wanted to return them quietly rather than get tangled in an insurance dispute. He also claimed to have documentation clearing the club of a warehouse robbery that had been loosely attributed to them by Deputy Chief Warren Pike, a piece of law enforcement speculation that had been poisoning the club's relationship with the town for weeks. Grant was skeptical. Dean Rivet Lawson, the club's road captain, was more than skeptical. He told Grant flat out that the whole thing smelled wrong. "Man offers you stolen property back out of the goodness of his heart," Rivet said. "He either wants something from you, or he's building a story where you come to collect and something goes sideways." "I know," Grant said. "Then why are we going?" "Because if those bikes exist and that documentation exists, and we don't go, Pike uses our absence as evidence we're hiding on something. And if we go and it's a setup, 22 witnesses see exactly what happened." Rivet had chewed on that logic for a full minute before nodding. He didn't like it, but he couldn't break it. They rode in a tight column, headlights cutting through a November sky that had gone completely dark by 6 in the evening. The desert highway out of Red Mesa was straight and empty, the kind of road that makes your mind wander if you let it. And Grant didn't let it. He kept his eyes forward and his mind cycling through contingencies. He had left word with 2 trusted people outside the club about where they were going and why. He had told both of them that if he didn't check in by midnight, they should start asking questions. He had done everything a careful man does when he suspects a situation might go wrong. He had not done the one thing that would have mattered most, which was to slow down before the underpass. The headlights picked her up at roughly 400 yards. A figure in the middle of the lane, standing still at first, then running directly toward them with both arms spread wide. Grant's first thought was accident. Someone's vehicle had broken down. Someone was injured. Someone was panicking in the road. His hand went to the brake before his mind had finished the sentence. Behind him, he heard the column compress riders reacting to his deceleration, spacing tightening, engines dropping in pitch. She kept running toward them, not away from something. Toward 22 motorcycles at highway speed, arms out, screaming something he couldn't hear yet over the engines. He squeezed the brake harder. At the moment he brought his bike to a complete stop, she was close enough that he could see the white of her knuckles where she was gripping a cracked phone, and close enough that the beam of his headlight turned her face into something stark and desperate, a 20-year-old woman with tangled blonde hair and pale blue eyes that were wide with a terror that was not performance. "It's a trap," she screamed. The words carried over the idling engines. "Stop, stop the bikes, they're going to kill all of you." Behind Grant, 21 riders came to a ragged halt across both lanes. Engines dropped to idle. Nobody got off their bikes. Rivet was beside Grant in 4 seconds, having split forward through the column the moment they stopped. "Who is she?" Rivet said. It wasn't a question. "I don't know," Grant said. He kept his eyes on her. She hadn't moved from the center of the road. She was breathing invisible clouds in the cold air, watching them with the kind of stillness that comes after someone has decided they have run out of options. "She could be bait," Rivet said. "She could be," Grant said. The woman, the girl, really, because up close she looked closer to a teenager than he'd initially thought, took 2 steps toward them. Her boots were worn through at the left heel. The olive green jacket she was wearing was a size 2 large and had a tear along the left shoulder that had been partially sewn shut with what looked like fishing line. "I know you don't have any reason to trust me," she said. Her voice was steadier than her hands. "I know what I look like. I know what you're thinking. But I need you to not go through that underpass. I need you to hear me first." "Talk," Grant said. She held up the phone. The screen was cracked along one corner but readable. She had it pointed directly at Grant's headlight so the text caught the illumination. He leaned forward. 22 angels. No witnesses after midnight. The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds. But inside those 3 seconds, something shifted across the entire column. Grant could feel it the way you feel a weather change before it arrives. A pressure drop in the collective attention of 21 men. "Where did you get that?" Grant said. "I took it," she said. "Off one of Rourke's men. He was texting on it outside the depot, and he set it down on an oil drum when he went to help move something. I took it and ran. I've been running for about 2 hours trying to get ahead of you." Rivet's voice came from beside Grant, low and controlled, but with an edge that had drawn blood before. "How did you know there were 22 of us?" She looked at him directly. "It's in the other messages. Scroll up. Give it to me," Grant said. She walked the remaining distance between them and held the phone out to him. Her hand was shaking slightly, but her eyes held his. She wasn't performing bravery. She was terrified and doing what she'd decided to do anyway, which Grant recognized because he had been that person himself in places that required it. He took the phone and scrolled. The messages were a thread between 2 numbers, no names, just numbers going back 4 days. The planning was specific enough that his jaw tightened reading through it. They had accounted for the column size. They had mapped the route. Someone had noted the exact approach angle to the underpass and the grade of the road leading down to it. A fuel tanker had been positioned on the freight company's upper lot, its brake line deliberately compromised. The intent was for the tanker to roll down the grade and into the underpass while the column was inside it. But the messages made clear that the fire and the destruction were only the secondary objective. The primary objective was the footage. Cameras had been placed along the approach, inside the depot, and at the underpass entrance. If it worked as planned, whatever investigators arrived afterward would find video evidence suggesting that the Hells Angels had ridden aggressively into a freight operation, triggered an explosion in the process, and that the resulting destruction was a consequence of biker violence rather than a coordinated ambush. Grant read it twice. Then he passed the phone to Rivet. He looked at the girl. What's your name? She said. Haley Morgan. How do you know Rourke? She paused. It was a specific kind of pause, not evasion, but the pause of someone who has told a story many times to people who didn't believe it and is deciding whether this time will be different. I used to work for him, she said. Grant nodded once. He turned to the man behind him, a compact, methodical writer named Owen Price, who had the kind of quiet authority that comes from being the most reliable person in any room, and said, "Take 2 riders, go up the grade, and tell me what's on the other side of that underpass." Owen didn't argue. He turned his bike around and signaled 2 others, and the 3 of them disappeared back up the highway in under a minute. Rivet finished reading and handed the phone to the rider beside him, Luis Switch Ortega, a former communications technician who had a gift for recovering information from damaged devices and an instinct for when he was looking at something real versus something manufactured. Switch read the messages twice without expression, then looked up. "Timestamps track," he said. "These weren't written tonight. Thread goes back 4 days. Whoever set this up planned it before they knew for sure you'd come." "They knew we'd come," Rivet said flatly. "The whole point was making an offer we had every reason to accept." Grant stepped off his bike. He walked to the edge of the road, away from the headlights, and stood in the dark for a moment. He could hear the wind moving across the desert floor and the distant, very faint creak of metal, somewhere ahead, something cooling, or straining, or both. Haley had followed him a few steps. She stopped when he stopped. "You're not afraid of us," he said. "I'm terrified of you," she said. "But you ran into the road anyway." "I didn't have anything left to lose," she said. "And you were going to die." He turned and looked at her. The honest answer of it settled something in him that the messages on the phone had not entirely settled, because messages could be fabricated, and bodies can be found, and fear is not always what it looks like. But there was a quality to what she just said that didn't have a manufactured origin. People who are bait don't say they have nothing left to lose. People who are bait say what they've been told to say. Owen returned 11 minutes later. He stopped his bike beside Grant and pulled off his helmet, and his expression was the expression of a man who has looked at something that required a second look to believe. "Tankers up on the freight lot," Owen said, "sitting at the top of the grade with the cab angled toward the approach road. I got close enough to see the brake line on the passenger side. It's been cut and patched, so it looks intact from a distance, but it'll fail under any sustained pressure. Angle of the slope down to the underpass is maybe 12 degrees. That thing rolls, it doesn't stop." He paused. "There are cameras. 4 that I saw. Mounted on poles along the approach, and 1 bracket mounted on the underpass entrance east side, above the clearance marker." Grant said nothing for a moment. "How long until midnight?" he said. Rivet checked his watch. 53 minutes. "They were going to let us ride in," Grant said. It wasn't a question. He was thinking out loud, working through the geometry of it. "Let us get inside the underpass, then roll the tanker. The cameras catch us going in and the aftermath. No footage of what triggered it. Rourke tells whatever story he wants." "That's what the messages say," Switch confirmed. Grant turned back to Haley. "You said you used to work for Rourke," he said. "For how long?" "About 14 months, she said. "I was a junior bookkeeper. I handled invoices for 3 of his freight contracts." "And that's how you knew about tonight?" "Not directly. I've been living near the old roadside diner about a mile back. I found it 8 months ago. It's been empty for years. I've been sleeping in the back storeroom." She said it matter-of-factly, without apology and without the particular humiliation that people often perform when they reveal something they know they're expected to be ashamed of. "Rourke's men drive past it sometimes. They never look twice at the diner. I've seen things I wasn't supposed to see. Including tonight," Grant said. "Including the last 3 nights. They were staging. I saw the tanker being repositioned 2 days ago. I didn't know what it was for until I got close enough to read the marker on the tank. It's a fuel carrier from a regional distributor. I heard 2 of them talking about the brake line last night. I heard your club's name." She stopped. "I didn't know who to call. I don't have a working phone. I don't have anyone I can call." Another pause that carried weight. So I waited on the road. Rivet had been listening with his arms crossed, the phone still in his hand, and the skepticism on his face had not entirely dissolved but had become more complicated. The skepticism of a man recalculating rather than dismissing. Okay, he said finally. Say all of this is exactly what you say it is. Say Rourke set this up and you stopped it. What do you want from us? Haley looked at him. I want you to leave, she said, before he figures out the tanker isn't rolling and starts wondering why. That's it, Rivet said. You run into the road in front of 22 motorcycles at night, nearly get yourself killed, and all you want is for us to drive away. Yes, why? She took a breath. Because if he sees me talking to you, it confirms everything he's been telling people about me for 8 months, and what's left of my life disappears. She held Rivet's gaze. And because you were going to die, and that's not something I could watch happen. Rivet stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Grant. Grant could read the shift in his road. Captain's face not agreement, but a different kind of attention. The kind that comes when a man who is very good at identifying liars does not find one. She's telling the truth, Rivet said quietly. I know, Grant said. He looked at Haley again. What did you find when you were doing the books? She went very still. That's not, Haley, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the decision was already made. Invoices that didn't match deliveries. Shipments logged as arriving at one location that I could verify through other records I cross-referenced were being diverted somewhere else. Some of it was relief supply contracts, county emergency management stuff, food, blankets, generator fuel, logged as delivered to shelters and community centers, but the receiving signatures were forged. She said it quickly, the way someone recites information they've memorized because they couldn't write it down and had to hold it in their head through months of cold nights and uncertain mornings. And parts, motorcycle parts, logged as salvage from insurance write-offs, but some of the serial numbers I matched, 3 of them myself before I was fired, came from bikes reported stolen in the last 2 years. Grant went quiet again. Around them, the column had spread slightly. Riders off their bikes now, the conversation having expanded to include more of them, without anyone deciding that out loud. Marcus Doc Bell, who had spent 15 years as a paramedic before retiring, had quietly moved to a position where he could see Haley's hands and her face not surveilling her, but watching with the particular clinical attention of someone checking vitals. She's hypothermic, Doc said, that it wasn't directed at her. She's been out in this temperature for hours. Grant didn't look away from Haley's face. When you reported what you found, he said, what happened? The question landed the way he'd intended it to, not as an accusation, but as an opening. An invitation to say the things she'd apparently been unable to make anyone believe. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the road. Then she said quietly, he told my supervisor I'd altered invoices to cover a theft. He had documentation. I don't know how he produced it. I didn't alter anything, but it looked real enough that HR immediately suspended me pending investigation, and 3 days later I was terminated. My supervisor told me I'd also been referred to the Rourke family attorney. A short, humorless exhale. The landlord got a call from someone I never found out who and I was evicted within the week. I had a little money saved. Not enough. She stopped. I went to the police. Deputy Chief Pike, Grant said. She looked up sharply. You know him. I know of him. He took a written statement, she said. He told me it would be investigated. 3 days after that, he personally informed me that the investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing by Rourke Freight and that pursuing further complaints of a fraudulent nature could itself constitute harassment of a private business. She said the words with the flat precision of someone who memorized them because the precise language mattered. He used the word harassment twice. Grant absorbed this. Your family, he said. You have family in Red Mesa. Her expression changed. A different kind of tightening, not fear, but something older than fear. My brother, she said. Nathan, he's lived here his whole life. He knows Rourke. Not well, but everyone knows Rourke. She stopped. Tried again. Nathan believed Rourke's version. Or he said he did. I don't know if he believed it or if he was just afraid to not believe it. Either way, she looked at the highway beneath her feet. He didn't let me stay with him. Nobody said anything. Doc moved closer to her and said, without preamble, "You're losing heat. Do you have anywhere to go tonight that isn't the diner?" She shook her head. "Then you're coming with us," he said. "I'm not, you're not a prisoner," he said, with the matter-of-fact tone of a man who has dealt with people in crisis for long enough to know that arguing about the logistics is a way of avoiding the necessity. "You're cold, and you've been out here for months, and you just potentially saved 22 lives. And I'm a medic, and I'm telling you medically that you need heat, food, and rest, the details we can work out." She looked at Grant. Grant said, "You don't have to, but you'd be doing me a favor." She blinked. "A favor?" "I have questions," he said, "and I'd rather ask them somewhere warm." A long pause. The wind moved between them. Somewhere up the grade, the freight tanker sat at the top of its slope with a failing brake line and a story it was supposed to tell about 22 who were still alive because one woman ran into the road. Haley looked at the column of motorcycles, 22 men watching her with expressions ranging from wary to calculating to something she probably didn't have an easy name for. She looked at the road back toward the diner where she'd slept for 8 months. She said, "Okay." Switch had been working on the damaged phone during the conversation, pulling what he could from its message archive with a patience and focus that looked like distraction but wasn't. He looked up now. "There's more," he said. "Deleted thread. I can see fragments. Looks like there are at least 2 other people involved in the planning." The messages reference contacts at the regional level, not just local. He met Grant's eyes. "This isn't just a Rourke operation. There's someone upstream." The word moved through the group like a slow current. Rivet looked at Grant. "We're not done here," he said. "No," Grant agreed. "We're not." He walked back to his motorcycle. He stood beside it for a moment, the 49-year-old man who had once fixed Army vehicles in conditions that would break most people, who had led this chapter through bankruptcy hearings and wrongful death investigations, and the particular grinding difficulty of keeping 22 complicated men moving in a useful direction. And he looked at the underpass. 400 yards of concrete and shadow, 12 minutes from their destination. A place he had ridden through 100 times without thinking about it. He thought about it now. "We're turning around," he said. His voice carried easily without being raised. 21 riders heard it. "We're going to find somewhere to put Haley where she's warm, and Switch is going to finish pulling everything off that phone. And then we're going to make a decision about what comes next, based on what we actually know rather than what we want to do." He looked along the column. "Nobody calls anybody about tonight until I give the word. Nobody posts anything. Nobody talks to anybody outside this group." He looked at Rivet. "You understand me," Rivet said. "Understood." He looked at the column. 21 faces, some he'd known for decades and some for a handful of years. All of them reading him the way experienced riders read weather, watching the indicators rather than the sky. "Let's move," he said. The engines started one by one. Haley stood at the side of the road and watched 22 motorcycles begin a slow turn in the dark. She had her arms wrapped around herself, the jacket not enough for the temperature, her body finally registering what it had been ignoring for hours. Doc came alongside her on his bike and said, "Ride with me or walk with me. Either way works, but we're going." She chose to ride. As she climbed on behind Doc's bike, she felt the heat of the engine through the air around her legs, and something in her chest did a complicated thing, not relief, not safety, because she didn't know yet if this was either of those things, but something that had more to do with the fact that for the first time in 8 months, she had told the truth to people who did not immediately decide she was wrong. She had no way to know yet whether it would last. But she had run out of the road, and they had stopped, and the tanker was still sitting at the top of its slope in the dark, and 22 men were still breathing. She held on as the motorcycle moved, and she kept her eyes open in the cold, and she thought about the messages on the cracked phone and the deleted thread and the word that Switch had used. Upstream. Whatever was coming, it was larger than Calvin Rourke. It was larger than Red Mesa. It was larger than anything she had found in 14 months of looking at invoices in a freight office, and she had found quite a lot. She hadn't told them everything. Not yet. But the night was still young, and for the first time in a very long time, she was going somewhere instead of hiding from it. The column of headlights moved back down the highway, away from the underpass, away from the tanker, and the cameras, and the story that was supposed to end with 22 men and one young woman who had never counted at all in anyone's calculation. She counted now. And the phone in Switch's jacket pocket was still giving up its secrets slowly, patiently, the way the truth usually works when someone finally gives it room. The lights moved through the dark, and the desert held its silence the way it always does, offering nothing, keeping everything, waiting for whoever was still standing to come and claim it. She ate like someone who had learned not to trust the next meal. That was the first thing Mara Mercer noticed. Not the torn jacket, not the worn-through boots, not the way the girl held her shoulders like she was waiting for a door to slam. All of that registered. But what stopped Mara mid-step when she came through her own kitchen was the way Haley Morgan ate. Quickly, methodically, eyes tracking the room between bites. A piece of bread disappeared into her jacket pocket without any apparent awareness that she'd done it. Mara set down the coffee pot and didn't say a word about it. Her diner, Mara's Roadhouse, 12 miles back from the underpass on the Old State Road, had been closed for the night when Grant called ahead. Mara had the lights on, the heat cranked, and a pot of chili on the stove by the time the column pulled into the gravel lot. She was 61 years old, and she had been Grant's older sister for all 59 of the years she'd known him. And she could read the quality of a situation in his voice before he finished explaining it. Tonight his voice had said, "I'm bringing you someone who needs everything and doesn't know how to ask for any of it." She knew that voice. She'd heard it before, in different contexts. She knew what to do with it. Doc had checked Haley over in the parking lot before they came inside core temperature, responsiveness, the particular flat effect that comes from sustained exposure and sustained fear operating simultaneously on a human body. He told Grant quietly that she wasn't in physical danger, but that she was closer to it than she looked, and that the next 8 hours mattered. Inside, Haley sat at the counter and ate while 22 men occupied every available chair and bar stool around her. The arrangement was not accidental. Grant had placed her in the middle of the room without making it obvious that he was doing so not to contain her, but to give her the noise and warmth of bodies around her, while leaving the counter at her back and the kitchen door ahead. Not a cell, a perimeter. Switch was at the far end of the counter with the cracked phone, a charging cable he'd sourced from Owen's saddlebag, and the particular focused stillness of a man extracting information from something that didn't want to give it up. He hadn't spoken in 40 minutes. Grant let him work. Rivet sat 2 stools from Haley and did not look at her directly, which was its own kind of attention. "You said Rourke had documentation," Grant said. "He was standing," which was how he thought. "Invoices with your name on them. Alterations he claimed you made." Haley set down her spoon. "Yes." Could he have fabricated them? He had access to everything in the system. Every invoice I ever touched had my employee ID attached to it. If someone with administrative access went into the archive and edited the records and then printed a new version, yes, easily. She picked up the spoon again. "I reported 3 discrepancies in writing before he made his accusation. Sent them to my supervisor through that company email. My supervisor told me she forwarded them to Rourke for review." A pause. "I'm sure that went well." "You have copies," Grant said. She looked at him. "Of what you found," he said. "You said you had copied ledger pages." Another pause. Longer this time. The kind of pause that has a decision inside it. "I have some," she said finally. "I didn't have access to a printer after the first week I started finding things. I hand-copied what I could. Serial numbers, date discrepancies, destination codes that didn't match the contracts I could see in the system. I have them in a waterproof bag." She looked at the counter. "At the diner." "You hid them there," Grant said. "I hid them there 8 months ago when I realized I needed somewhere that nobody would look." She said it plainly. A homeless woman's sleeping spot behind an abandoned building. is not somewhere professional investigators typically search. Rivet made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. She's not wrong, he said. No, Grant said. She's not. Doc refilled his own coffee and sat down across from Haley. He had the easy, unhurried manner of someone who has spent years delivering bad news to people in shock, not callous, but steady. Your brother, he said. Nathan. How long has he been in Red Mesa? Haley looked at him with an expression that said she recognized what he was doing and was deciding whether to let him do it. His whole life, she said. He's 34. He works equipment maintenance for the county road department. He's lived in the same house for 11 years. She turned the spoon over in her bowl. He's not a bad person. He's a person who picked the version of events that let him keep his life the way it was. Does he know where you've been sleeping? Doc said. A beat. No, she said. I didn't tell him. And he didn't ask. Nobody filled the silence after that. Mara came from the kitchen with more bread and refilled Haley's water glass and touched her briefly on the shoulder as she passed the lightest, most casual gesture, barely anything, gone before Haley could respond to it. But Haley's hand tightened on the water glass, and she looked down at the counter, and her jaw moved slightly, and that was all. That was enough. Grant watched it and looked away. He walked to the end of the counter where Switch was working. Talk to me, he said quietly. Switch sat back. He laid the phone face up on the counter and put his finger on the screen without pressing anything. Deleted thread is about 60% recovered. The other 40% is gone overwritten, not just deleted. Whoever sent these messages was being careful, or someone was being careful on their behalf. He slid the phone toward Grant. But the 60% I have is enough. There are 3 numbers in the thread. The local number we already identified as one of Rourke's direct crew. The second number has a regional area code, Western Nevada. Could be Reno. Could be anywhere in a 3-county stretch. The third number is a Nevada state exchange. Grant kept his face very still. State exchange. Not necessarily a government line. But Switch looked at him. The context of the messages around it suggests it's not a personal phone. The communication pattern is specific short windows, odd hours, responses within minutes regardless of time. He picked up the phone again. I know what that pattern looks like. I've seen it in organizations that run comms through official infrastructure because it gives them document protection. Grant said, meaning if someone subpoenas those records, they hit a wall, Switch said. Yes. Who else knows this right now, you and me? Grant nodded slowly. He looked across the diner at the room of men who had ridden out tonight, expecting a straightforward reckoning, and had found something that went sideways in a direction nobody had anticipated. He looked at Haley, who was letting Mara talk to her now quietly. Mara doing what Mara did, which was find the frequency that made people feel slightly less alone. He looked at the door. Nobody leaves tonight, he said to Switch. Not individually. Already told Owen, Switch said. Good. He walked back to the center of the room and stood where everyone could see him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. What we have tonight, he said, is bigger than what we came out here for. I want everybody to understand that before we go any further, because the size of it changes what we can and can't do. He looked around the room. The straightforward version of tonight is, we avoid an ambush. We take the evidence to the right people. Rourke gets arrested. We go home. I want that version. I think we all do. He paused. But the phone Switch has been working on suggests that the right people might include someone who has been feeding information to Rourke about how to avoid the wrong people, which means we can't move on this the way we would move on a straightforward problem. Rivet said, from his stool, Pike. Pike is part of it, Grant said. But Pike may not be all of it. That's what I'm saying. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when 22 people simultaneously update the calculation they've been running, Owen said. So what do? We talk to someone we can trust outside of local law enforcement, Grant said. Someone with enough jurisdiction to go over Pike's head and enough standing that Rourke can't make a call and make it go away. He looked at Switch. I have a name. I've been avoiding using it because I didn't want to owe the favor. Tonight changes that math. Switch said, State investigator, Grant confirmed. Elena Shaw. She's been building a case in the background for the better part of 2 years, not just on Rourke, on the pattern he's part of. She reached out to me 6 months ago, asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. He let that land. I know what she's talking about now. Rivet was watching him carefully. You sat on a contact like that for 6 months. I sat on it because her investigation wasn't our fight, and I didn't see any benefit in becoming part of it. Grant met his road captain's eyes. I was wrong. I'm telling you I was wrong. It's now our fight, and we wasted 6 months of runway on it. Rivet held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, not conceding the argument exactly, but acknowledging that the moment for it wasn't now. Haley had turned on her stool. She was listening. She said, "Who is Elena Shaw?" "A state investigator with a track record of not being influenced by the people she's investigating," Grant said. "Which, in the current situation, matters considerably. Can she move on this before Rourke figures out? The underpass didn't go the way it was supposed to. I don't know yet. That's the first question I'm going to ask her." Haley said, "He'll know by morning, maybe before. He had people monitoring the depot. When nobody shows up, when the tanker doesn't roll," she stopped. "He'll know something went wrong. And the only thing that went wrong was me." "He doesn't know it was you," Grant said. "He doesn't know for certain," she said, "but I'm the only person who knew enough and had motive and was close enough to get to you in time. It won't take him long." She looked at her hands. "He's been waiting 8 months for a reason to escalate. I think I just gave him one." Mara, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, said, "Then she can't go back to the diner." "No," Grant agreed. "She can stay here," Mara said. "We have 2 rooms in the back. They're small, but they lock." Haley turned to look at Mara with an expression that was difficult to read, gratitude and suspicion arriving at the same moment, which is what happens to people who have been let down by generosity enough times to have learned to check it for conditions. "I'm not accepting charity," Haley said. Mara looked at her without any particular emotion. "I didn't offer you charity," she said. "I offered you a room that locks. Those aren't the same thing." "A beat." "Okay," Haley said. It was 3 a.m. before Grant reached Elena Shaw. She picked up on the second ring, which told him she either hadn't been sleeping or she'd been waiting for a call that might come from any direction. He gave her the compressed version, 7 minutes. No elaboration, only the facts that couldn't be left out. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. "The phone," she said. "The messages. You have the device. We have it. Don't let it leave your possession. Don't connect it to anything except the charger you already have. Don't send images of the screen to anyone." A pause. "Can your man who recovered the deleted content write a documentation chain time? Method, what he found, what was already gone when he started." "He can do that tonight," Grant said. "Tell him to do it tonight," she said. "I need to make some calls in the morning before I can tell you what kind of timeline we're working with. Rourke has relationships that will need to be routed around carefully. This is not going to move as fast as you want it to. He'll know something failed by morning." "I know," she said. "That's the part I'm thinking about." Another pause. "The girl, the one who warned you, where is she?" "Safe. With us. Does Rourke have any reason to know it was her specifically?" Grant looked across the diner at Haley, who had fallen asleep on her stool and was being gently redirected toward the back room by Mara not quite touching her, just talking her toward it, the way you guide someone who is more exhausted than they know. "Not certainty," he said. "But she thinks he'll figure it out. She might be right." Shaw's voice was measured, not alarmed, but precise. "Keep her where you have her. If she has evidence, physical copies of anything, I need to know about that separately." "She has copies," Grant said. "Handwritten. 8 months old but detailed." A pause. "Handwritten. She was a bookkeeper. She hand-copied what she found because she didn't have printer access." A longer pause. "Okay. That's something I can work with. Handwritten records are harder to dismiss as fabricated because producing a convincing forgery of something handwritten over that length of time is a different problem than doctoring a digital document." Shaw seemed to be thinking as she spoke. Get me everything she has. Don't photograph it. Don't scan it. Bring it to me in person with a chain of custody I can document. Another pause. And Grant. Yeah, I need you to keep your people calm and out of the way. I know what your instinct is going to be when this starts moving and things start happening that feel wrong. I need you to trust the process over the instinct. Can you do that? Grant said. You're asking a man who just turned 22 motorcycles around in the middle of the desert if he can exercise restraint. I'm asking exactly that. Yes. I turned the motorcycles around, he said. Then yes, she said. I think you can, she hung up. Grant stood in the quiet of the diner for a moment. Most of the riders had found positions around the room, some sleeping across booths, some talking in low voices near the far wall, Owen at the window with his characteristic watchfulness. Switch was still at the counter, the phone charging beside him and a spiral notebook open in front of him where he was building the documentation chain Shaw had requested. Rivet came to stand beside Grant. He had his jacket on still, which meant he hadn't decided to stay comfortable yet, which meant he was still running a separate calculation. Anything I need to know, Rivet said. State investigator named Elena Shaw is going to make calls in the morning. She needs the phone and Haley's records brought to her directly. She's going to try to get warrants before Rourke repositions. Grant looked at the floor. She needs us to stay lateral, not involved in whatever enforcement action comes. Rivet was quiet for a moment. And if it goes wrong, then we deal with it going wrong, Grant said. But we don't go through that underpass first. Rivet looked at him. A long look. The look of a man who has ridden beside another man long, to not LaFaux that there are moments when what's being said is less important than the quality of conviction behind it. All right, Rivet said. Morning came with the particular gray brightness of a November desert dawn, not warm, but lit. Mara had coffee ready before most of the riders were awake. Haley was awake before all of them. She had slept 4 hours, Grant could tell by the calibration of her exhaustion, the way it had partially lifted but not cleared. And she had come out of the back room with her boots already on and her jacket already zipped, which was the unconscious preparation of someone who had learned that leaving needed to be possible without notice. She found the bread she'd pocketed the night before, still in her jacket. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it on the counter. Mara poured her coffee without comment. They sat together in the early quiet, Mara on one side of the counter and Haley on the other, and Mara talked. Not about the investigation, not about Rourke. She talked about the diner, how long she'd had it, what it had been before she bought it, the particular difficulty of running a business in a town that was slowly losing its economic center. She talked about it the way people talk about things they love that are also exhausting, without self-pity and without performance. Haley listened. After a while, she started asking questions. Real questions. Specific ones: occupancy costs, supplier contracts, whether the county had any small business programs she hadn't been able to access. Mara noticed it and filed it away. Grant came out at 6:30 and sat at the counter. He looked at Haley and said, I need your records. The copies you made. We need to get to them before Rourke's people decide to look at the diner. Haley nodded. I'll go get them. Not alone, he said. I know the hiding spot, she said. I need to be the one to get them. You can be the one to get them, he said. With 2 riders. She looked like she was going to argue, then didn't. Fine. And then we're going to talk to someone named Elena Shaw, he said. You're going to need to tell her everything you told me, and more. Haley wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Is she safe? I think so, he said. I wouldn't be calling her if I thought otherwise. That's not a yes, she said. No, he admitted. It's not. It's the best I can do right now. She absorbed this. She took a drink of coffee. She said, I once told the truth to police, and it made everything worse. I once told the truth to my own brother, and he decided the other version was more convenient. She set the cup down. I'm not sure what to do with someone telling me to trust again. Grant said, you don't have to trust her. You have to decide if what she can do is worth the risk. Haley looked at him. That's a different thing, he said. Trust is personal. This is operational. A long pause. She said, operational. Owen and Rivet went with her to the diner. They were gone 40 minutes. When they came back, Rivet was carrying a waterproof bag, the kind sold for camping. Bright orange, sealed with a twist top. And his expression was different than when he'd left. Not alarmed. Recalibrated again. He set the bag on the counter in front of Grant and Switch and said, "You need to see what's in here." Switch opened it carefully. Inside, sealed inside a second layer of plastic, were 23 handwritten pages filled on both sides with the small, precise notation of someone trained in accounting, cross-referenced and dated and organized with the kind of internal logic that made it immediately clear these were not notes. This was documentation, built over weeks, organized for eventual use, written by someone who knew what a record needed to contain to be taken seriously. Switch went through it page by page. He didn't speak for several minutes. Haley stood by the counter and watched him, read her work, the things she had produced in secret and protected through 8 months of sleeping on a concrete floor. The thing that was simultaneously her only leverage and the primary reason someone wanted her to disappear. Switch looked up. He looked at Grant. "There are serial numbers here I recognize," he said. "2 of them. From a storage unit break-in 2 years ago, east of Carson City." He laid the page flat. "We reported those bikes stolen. Insurance covered one, not the other. The one insurance didn't cover. I assumed it was gone." He looked at the page again. "It passed through Rourke's facility 7 weeks after the theft. The room had gone quiet." "There's more than Rourke here," Switch said. "This is a supply chain. Someone is moving stolen property through his operation, and someone above him is providing cover. This has been running for at least 2 years, probably longer." He looked at Haley. "You knew all of this," he said. It wasn't accusatory. It was the statement of a man recalculating the scale of what she'd been carrying. "I knew what I could see from my position," she said. "I was a junior bookkeeper. I didn't have access to the full system. What I hand-copied was what I could access before he locked me out." She looked at the pages. "I always thought there was more. I couldn't prove them all more." Switch said, "The phone fills in some of the gaps." Cross-referenced with this, he shook his head. "Grant, we need Shaw here today. Not tomorrow. Today." Grant was already reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, the door of the diner opened. It was Owen, who had stayed in the parking lot after the trip to the diner. He came in fast and stopped just inside the door with a specific expression that Grant recognized from years of learning to read the faces of men who delivered news that required an immediate decision. "2 vehicles," Owen said, "parked on the state road about a quarter-mile back. They weren't there when we came in from the diner. Engine still hot on one of them." The room reconfigured instantly, the kind of coordinated, wordless response that happens in groups of people who have spent years operating under pressure together. Riders moved to windows. Doc moved to the kitchen, where there was no exterior glass. Rivet was at the door beside Owen in 4 steps. Grant looked at Haley. She had already picked up the waterproof bag. "They found me," she said. It wasn't panic. It was the flat acknowledgement of someone who had calculated this possibility from the beginning and had simply been waiting to find out when. "Maybe," Grant said. "Or they followed us, which means they've known roughly where we are since last night." "Does it matter which?" she said. "Not right now," he said. He turned to Switch. "Phone and bag stay together. You stay with both." He turned to Doc. "Haley goes with you. Back room, stay away from the exterior walls." He turned to Mara, who was standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, and an expression that said she was ready for whatever instruction was about to come and would not require it to be repeated. "Lock the kitchen," he said. Mara turned without a word and was gone. He walked to Rivet and Owen. "How many?" "Vehicles, 2 in the first," Owen said. Couldn't see the second clearly. "Tinted. They watching the diner or passing by?" "Watching," Owen said. "The first car's been sitting position since I spotted it." "Nobody's come out," Grant said. "Then they don't know what they're looking for yet. Or they do, and they're waiting for instructions." He looked at Rivet. "This doesn't go loud. Nobody does anything that gives Rourke's people a reason to come closer or go pike with a complaint that we're creating a problem." Rivet said, "You want me to just stand here?" I want you to stand here while I call Shaw, Grant said. And if those vehicles move toward this building, I want you to know exactly what we're doing before they get here, which is making sure that whatever happens next happens in front of as many witnesses as possible, Grant said. We are not the story Rourke wants to tell. We're going to make absolutely certain of that. Rivet's jaw tightened. He looked out the window at the distant vehicles. He looked back at Grant. Fine, he said, make the call. Grant dialed Elena Shaw. She picked up on the first ring this time. He said, we need to accelerate the timeline. She said, tell me. He told her. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, how many records does the girl have? 23 pages. Both sides. Documented, cross-referenced, dated. I need them today, Shaw said. And I need her today. I'm 2 hours out. Can you hold your position for 2 hours? Grant looked out the window at the parked vehicles. He looked around the diner at 22 men and one young woman who had been living behind an abandoned building for 8 months because she'd made the mistake of being honest inside a dishonest organization. We'll hold it, he said. He hung up. He walked back to the counter and sat down. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Across the room, Switch was carefully separating Haley's handwritten pages into a sequence that would make them easiest for Shaw to follow, organizing the work of 8 months of cold nights and careful, hidden labor into the shape it needed to take, to do what it was always meant to do. 2 hours. In 2 hours, either this moved towards something or it collapsed into something. Grant had spent 49 years learning that the only way through the space between those two outcomes was to hold your position and make sure, whatever happened, that you were on the right side of what people would say about it afterward. He had turned the motorcycles around. He had listened when nobody expected him to. He intended to keep doing both. Outside, the vehicles on the state road sat exactly where they were. And in the back room of Mara's Roadhouse, Haley Morgan sat with her boots on and the waterproof bag across her knees, and the particular patience of someone who has learned that the worst thing you can do when everything is about to change is move before you. Understand which direction the change is coming from. She had been waiting 8 months. She could wait 2 more hours. Elena Shaw arrived in 1 hour and 40 minutes, not 2 hours. She drove herself, no escort, no marked vehicle, nothing that would read as official from the state road, and she came in through the back entrance of Mara's Roadhouse after a single brief call to Grant telling him which door she wanted unlocked. She was 53, compact, with the kind of stillness that develops in people who have spent decades in rooms where saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment ends investigations. She shook Grant's hand once, firmly, and then she walked directly to the back room where Haley was sitting. She didn't knock. She opened the door, stepped inside, and sat down across from Haley without preamble. My name is Elena Shaw, she said. I've been building a case against Calvin Rourke's operation for 22 months. I need to know everything you know in the order you learned it, and I need you to tell me what you can prove separately from what you believe. Can you do that? Haley looked at her for a long moment. You got here fast, she said. I was already moving toward Red Mesa before Grant called this morning, Shaw said. Something shifted in the pattern of Rourke's communications last week. I've been monitoring the edges of it. When Grant called last night, it confirmed what I thought the shift meant. She held Haley's gaze. You're not a surprise to me. The fact that you exist and that you have what you have, that's the piece I was missing. Haley said, I tried to report this 8 months ago, I know, Shaw said. Deputy Chief Pike closed your complaint in 72 hours without opening an investigative file. I have that document. It's part of what I'm building. She paused. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry it took this long. Those are true statements, and they're also not sufficient, and I'm not going to spend time on them right now because you need something more useful from me than an apology. Haley was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what do you need? Start from the beginning, Shaw said. The first invoice that didn't look right. What you noticed. What you did about it. What happened next. Don't summarize. Give me the details. Grant closed the door and left them to it. He came back to the front of the diner and found Rivet standing at the window with Owen, both of them watching the state road. The two vehicles were still there. A third had joined them in the past 20 minutes, a pickup truck, dark blue, parked slightly apart from the other two. They're not surveillance anymore, Rivet said when Grant came to stand beside him. 3 vehicles is coordination. Or they're waiting for a fourth, Owen said. Either way, Rivet said, they're not going away on their own. Grant looked at the vehicles for a moment. 3 vehicles, 6 to 8 people minimum, parked on a public road, a quarter mile from a private business at 7:30 in the morning in freezing temperatures. They weren't hiding. They didn't need to. The message was the presence itself, a reminder that Rourke had people and reach and patience, and that this morning was going to end the way he decided it ended. Grant turned away from the window. He trusted that calculation less with every minute that Shaw spent in the back room. Switch, he said. The documentation chain, is it complete? Finished it at 5 this morning, Switch said. He had the notebook open. Time-stamped, method documented, chain of custody from the moment Owen brought the phone inside. 7 pages. Give it to Shaw when she comes out. Already set aside. Doc was at the counter with his second coffee. He said, without turning around, the girl hasn't eaten this morning. She took the bread off the counter and put it back. She's been doing that, taking things and putting them back, like she's practicing not needing them. Grant sat down beside him. He didn't say anything for a moment. She slept 4 hours, Doc continued. She kept her boots on. I checked on her at 4:30, and she was sitting up in the bed with her jacket on, just waiting. Like sleeping was something she was doing provisionally. He wrapped both hands around his cup. 8 months. That does things to a person's nervous system that don't reverse in one night. No, Grant said. They don't. We need to think about what happens to her after, Doc said. Not just today, after. I know. She's going to resist whatever we offer. Doc looked at him. Then we need to make sure we're offering the right thing. Not the generous thing. The right thing. Mara appeared from the kitchen and set a plate of eggs and toast at the counter without being asked. She slid it toward Grant and said, take that to the back room. Shaw can wait 10 minutes. Shaw is not someone you make wait, Grant said. Shaw is a person doing her job, Mara said. Haley is a 20-year-old who hasn't had a warm breakfast in 8 months. Shaw can have one too, I already made it. She set a second plate beside the first. Now take those back. Grant looked at his sister. Then he picked up both plates. When he opened the back room door, Shaw had her notebook out, and Haley was talking in the flat, precise cadence of someone reciting memorized details, dates, invoice numbers, the specific language of discrepancy codes that only make sense if you understand freight accounting well enough to know what they're supposed to say. Grant set the plates down without a word and left. He had made it 2 steps down the hallway when he heard Haley stop mid-sentence. A pause, then quietly she made this. My sister, Grant said through the open door. She said Shaw can wait 10 minutes. Another pause. Shaw said, your sister is correct. He went back to the front. Rivet had moved away from the window. He was sitting in a booth with his arms on the table, and he had the look of a man whose patience was losing an argument with his instincts. Grant sat down across from him. Say it, Grant said. We have 22 riders, Rivet said. Rourke has 6 to 8 people on a public road being deliberately visible. He knows we're inside this building. He's not going to wait forever. And whatever Shaw is building in that back room is going to take more time than his patience will hold. Probably, Grant said. So what's the plan if they move before she's done? Same as it's always been, Grant said. We make sure everything that happens is visible and documented and unambiguous about who initiated it. That works great in a courtroom, Rivet said. It works less great when something physical is happening in real time. Then nothing physical happens, Grant said. Not from us, not first. Rivet looked at the table. You know I can hold that line, he said. I'm not sure about all 22. Which ones? Rivet named 3. Grant nodded. He called Owen over and spoke to him for 90 seconds. Low and direct, and Owen went and had quiet conversations with each of the 3 riders in question. It wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a lecture. It was the kind of conversation that happens when a man who is trusted by other men explains specifically and without decoration what is at stake and what will happen if the line is crossed. All three nodded. Grant went back to waiting. At 9:17, the back room door opened and Shaw came out first. She had her notebook closed and under her arm, and her expression was the expression of someone who has just received a larger confirmation than they expected. She stopped at the counter and looked at Switch and said, "You're the one who pulled the deleted messages." "Yes," Switch said. "Documentation chain." He handed her the notebook. She read it standing up, 7 pages in under 4 minutes, and when she finished, she set it on the counter and said, "This is solid. I can use this." She looked at Grant. "The phone needs to come with me. I need it in secure custody before noon." "It goes when you go," Grant said. "Good." She looked at the window. He didn't need to ask if she'd seen the vehicles. "How long have they been there?" "First 2 since before 7, Grant said. "Third arrived around 7:40. "Are they Rourke's direct crew or contracted?" "I don't know. Owen can tell you more." He nodded toward Owen. Shaw spent 3 minutes with Owen, asking specific questions about vehicle makes, plate visibility, movement patterns. Owen answered all of them with the economy of someone who has been paying careful attention for a specific purpose. Shaw wrote in her notebook, tore the page out, and put it in her jacket pocket. She came back to Grant. "I need to make a call before I leave," she said. "There are 2 things I want in place before I walk out that door. First, I'm going to route a request for a county records hold on Rourke's freight documentation that prevents him from destroying paper records while we work toward warrants. Second, I want 2 of my people outside this building before those vehicles on the road get impatient." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to stay exactly where you are until they arrive." "Can you do that?" "How long?" Grant said. 45 minutes. "We can do 45 minutes. She stepped away to make her calls. Haley had come out of the back room and was standing at the far end of the counter. She looked lighter, in the specific way that people look after they've transferred a weight they've been carrying, alone, not lighter because the problem was gone, but lighter because it was no longer only on them. She was still watchful. She was still tracking the room. But something in the set of her shoulders had changed by approximately 1 degree. And to anyone who'd been watching her since last night, that degree was significant. Mara poured her more coffee. Haley wrapped both hands around the cup and stood at the counter and watched Shaw make phone calls with the focused attention of someone learning how a process works by observing it operate. Doc came and stood beside Haley. He said quietly, "How are you doing?" she said. "I'm not sure yet." "Fair enough," he said. "She believed me," Haley said. Shaw. She said it like she was still measuring the reality of it against her expectation. "She didn't ask me once why I waited so long. She didn't ask me why I didn't have more evidence. She just asked what I knew." "That's what good investigators do," Doc said. "The police officer who took my statement 8 months ago asked me 4 times why I didn't have more evidence," Haley said. "Like the absence of evidence I wasn't given access to produce was proof that what I was saying was wrong." She looked at her coffee. "I've spent 8 months thinking about that question, wondering if he was right." Doc said he wasn't. "I know that now," she said. "I knew it then, too. But knowing something and surviving the doubt are 2 different problems." Doc had nothing to add to that, and he was experienced enough to know when adding something would be worse than leaving a true statement alone. The 45 minutes passed in the specific, loaded quiet of people waiting for something they cannot accelerate. Switch reorganized his documentation. Owen maintained his position at the window. Rivet drank 3 cups of coffee in succession without appearing to taste any of them. Mara ran her kitchen the way she always ran it, with the steady purposefulness of a woman who has learned that maintaining normality during abnormal circumstances is itself a form of control. Shaw's 2 people arrived in 38 minutes, a man and a woman in an unremarkable sedan, who came in through the back without discussion and took positions near the front windows and the hallway without being asked where to stand. They were not uniformed. They were not performing authority. They were simply present in the specific way that trained people are present when they are working. The vehicles on the state road did not move. Shaw came back to Grant. "I have the records hold in place," she said. I have a warrant request moving through a judge in Carson City who is not in Rourke's professional orbit. It will take until tomorrow morning minimum, possibly longer. What that means for tonight is that Rourke cannot destroy his paper trail, but he can still move people, and he can still apply pressure. She looked at him directly. I need the girl somewhere that isn't this building tonight. We can move her, Grant said. Somewhere Rourke's people won't find her in a single search. She paused. Somewhere that isn't obviously connected to you. Grant said, my sister owns this building. My sister is connected to me. Your sister also has a legitimate business license, no criminal record, and no documented association with club activity, Shaw said. That's different from your chapter house or any property that Rourke could argue to Pike was a club facility. She looked at Mara, who was visible through the kitchen pass-through. She can stay here if your sister agrees. It's not ideal, but it's defensible. Grant went and talked to Mara for 2 minutes. He came back and said she agrees. Shaw nodded. She picked up the phone the crack prepaid that had started all of this, that a 20-year-old woman had stolen off an oil drum and run 2 hours through desert cold to deliver and placed it in an evidence bag she produced from her jacket. She sealed it. She wrote on the label. She looked at Haley. I'm going to need you to testify, she said, when the time comes. Not today, not this week, but when it comes. Can you do that? Haley said. Yes. It's going to be uncomfortable, Shaw said. Rourke's attorney will go after your credibility. Your living situation, your work history, the circumstances of your termination. They'll use everything. I know, Haley said. And you can still do it. Yes, Haley said again, more certain this time. Shaw looked at her for a moment longer than strictly necessary, not evaluation, but something closer to acknowledgement. Then she said, good, picked up her notebook and walked out the back door. Her 2 people stayed. The room exhaled. Rivet sat back in his booth and pressed both hands flat on the table and said, to no one in particular, now we wait. Now we wait, Grant confirmed. What followed was 3 days that moved with the peculiar slowness of situations where the significant events are happening elsewhere, in rooms and on phones and inside legal systems that don't give progress reports. Shaw called Grant twice daily brief calls, minimal information, the cadence of someone managing multiple plates without dropping the communication thread. The record's hold was in place. The warrant request was moving. Rourke had retained a private attorney who had filed 2 procedural objections that needed to be answered before the judge would sign. This was normal. This was not a setback. This was the process working exactly as designed to prevent wrongful seizure. Grant relayed what he could to his riders. He sent most of them home on day 2, keeping Rivet, Switch, Owen, and Doc, releasing the other 18 with specific instructions and the understanding that they were on call, that they said nothing to nobody, and that if anyone from local law enforcement approached them about the previous Thursday night, they answered no questions without an attorney present. All 18 went. He trusted them, which was not a given in all circumstances, but was a reasonable confidence here, because the 22 of them had built it through years of doing what they said they would do in situations where not doing it would have been easier. Haley moved between the front of the diner and the back room in a rhythm that gradually shifted over 3 days. By the second morning, she was helping Mara with the breakfast prep, not asked, not assigned, simply appearing in the kitchen at 6:30 and beginning to work. Mara gave her the tasks that needed doing and told her when she was doing something wrong, which Haley accepted without defensiveness and corrected immediately. By the second afternoon, she had asked Mara 3 questions about the diner's supplier contracts. By the third morning, Mara told Grant quietly that the girl had caught a pricing error in the produce invoice that would have cost Mara $42 a week unnoticed. She's good, Mara said, in the specific tone she used for things she considered significant without wanting to oversell. I know, Grant said. The vehicles on the state road disappeared after day 1. Whether Rourke pulled them back because Shaw's people had logged them or because he was repositioning for something else, nobody knew. The absence was not comfort. It was a different kind of pressure. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Haley's phone, the temporary one Mara had helped her get, a prepaid with a new number that only Grant, Mara, Shaw, and Doc had received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. The voice on the other end was Nathan's. She hadn't heard her brother's voice in 8 months. It landed on her the way familiar things land after long absences simultaneously, larger and smaller than memory. The real version always slightly different from the preserved one. "Haley," he said. "It's me. I know you probably don't want to." He stopped. "I'm at the freight depot. Rourke's men brought me here an hour ago. They said they needed to talk to me about county road department contracts. I thought it was legitimate. I'm in the warehouse and they won't let me leave." Haley went completely still. "Nathan," she said. Her voice was controlled, but her hand on the phone was not. "Are you hurt?" "No, no. But they took my phone and gave me this one. They said I could make one call." He paused. "I called you. I don't know if that was right." "I don't know what." His voice broke slightly. "I'm sorry, Haley. I should have believed you. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize right now," she said. "Is there anyone else in the room with you?" "One man. Outside the door. I can see him through the window. Don't move. Don't argue with them. Don't do anything until you hear from me." She was already standing. "Nathan, did they say anything about what they want?" A pause. They said they want to talk to you. They said if you come and bring what you took from the office, I can go home." Haley closed her eyes. She stood in the back room of Mara's roadhouse, with her eyes closed and her brother's voice in her ear, and 8 months of everything that had happened between them sitting in her chest like a stone, and she made a calculation that took 4 seconds, but felt much longer. She said, "I'll get you out. Stay still." She hung up. She walked out of the back room. Grant was at the counter. He saw her face and was on his feet before she reached him. "It's Nathan," she said. "Rourke has him at the depot. They want me to come and bring the records." She said it clearly, factually, with the particular steadiness of someone who has already reached the other side of the panic and is operating from a decision. "I know it's a trap. It was a trap when he used the motorcycles, and it's a trap now. But Nathan is inside that building because of me." "And stop," Grant said. She stopped. He looked at her, not with dismissal, with the full attention of a man processing information quickly and accurately. "Call Shaw," he said. "There's no time to call Shaw," he said again. "Right now, before you do anything else." Haley looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she called Shaw. Shaw picked up immediately. Haley told her. Shaw was quiet for 4 seconds, the longest 4 seconds of the conversation. And then she said, "Do not go to that depot. I need you to understand that clearly. Do not go." "He's my brother," Haley said. "I know. And going there will not get him out. Going there will give Rourke exactly what he needs to destroy everything we've built in the last 3 days and potentially get both of you hurt." Shaw's voice was controlled but not cold. "I have people I can move. We have enough for an emergency warrant application on the basis of a reported detention. That takes time, but it's real. If you go in alone with those records, we lose the records, we potentially lose you. And Rourke walks away from all of it." "How much time?" Haley said. 2 hours, possibly less. 2 hours. The same 2 hours from this morning 3 days ago, except this time Nathan was inside the building and the freight depot was not Mara's roadhouse, and Rourke had already shown that he was willing to hurt people to protect his operation. Haley looked at Grant. He could see in her face the exact split she was experiencing, the person who understood the operational logic of what Shaw was saying versus the person who had grown up with Nathan and knew the particular vulnerability of a man who had never had to account for his own cowardice before. She said into the phone, 2 hours. 2 hours, Shaw confirmed. "Stay where you are. I'll call you the moment I can tell you something has changed." Haley hung up. She stood in the center of the diner and said nothing for approximately 30 seconds. Then she sat down at the counter. Mara put coffee in front of her without being asked. Haley put both hands around it and stared at the surface of the liquid. Grant sat beside her. He didn't say anything about what she should or shouldn't do. He just sat there, which was what the situation required. After a minute, Haley said, "He believed Rourke, Because it was easier. I've known that since it happened. I wasn't surprised. She stopped. I was ashamed. Because he's my brother and I wanted him to be better than that and he wasn't. And it reflected back on me, somehow, like if my own family didn't believe me, then maybe I really was. She didn't finish the sentence. Grant said he called you. She looked at him. Of everyone he could have called, Grant said. He called you. A long pause. Yes, she said. That's not nothing, Grant said. She looked at her coffee. She said nothing, but something in her face shifted by a degree that was visible, if you were watching for it, which Grant was. Doc appeared from the hallway. He had been in the back room and had heard enough to understand the situation. He came to the counter and said, simply, "What do we need to do?" "Shaw needs 2 hours," Grant said. "We hold position and we let her work." Doc nodded. He sat down. Rivet came from the window and sat on Haley's other side without being asked and without saying anything, which was a form of solidarity that required no language. Switch was already on his laptop, pulling up everything he had on the freight depot layout, public records, county assessor documents, anything that was available without trespassing on unauthorized systems. He found floor plans from a building permit application filed 11 years ago and spread them on the counter. If Nathan is in the warehouse section, Switch said, there are 3 exits from that specific room, 2 loading doors and a pedestrian exit on the north wall. He traced it with his finger. If Shaw's people come in from the county roadside, they enter through, send it to Shaw, Grant said. Switch had it forwarded in 40 seconds. Shaw called back in 12 minutes. "I have the building plans," she said. "I also have a reported detention on record and a judge who is expediting based on the prior warrant application. I'm moving people now. I need one more thing." "Name it," Grant said. "If I'm going to walk into that depot legally and efficiently, I need to know where Rourke's financial records room is physically located inside the building. The warrant covers the whole structure, but I don't have time to search it systematically. I need a starting point." Grant looked at Haley. "She knows," he said. "She worked there." He handed Haley the phone. "Shaw," said Haley, "I need you to describe the interior of the building from memory. Start from the main entrance and tell me every room you accessed as an employee." Haley took a breath. She closed her eyes. She began talking the entrance. The front office, the hallway with the loading bay access on the left and the staff corridor on the right. The accounting room with its 2 locked filing cabinets positioned against the east wall. The secondary room behind it with the keypad entry that her supervisor had told her was a server room but that she had seen once through an open door, contained paper files in floor-to-ceiling shelving. "The door to the secondary room," Shaw said. "What side of the room is the keypad on?" "Left side of the door frame," Haley said. "About chest height. It's a 4-digit code." "I don't know the code." "That's enough," Shaw said. Then he paused. "Stay where you are. Both of you." A specific emphasis on both. "I mean that." She hung up again. An hour passed. Then an hour and 20 minutes. The diner was very quiet, the particular quality of quiet that happens when multiple people are listening without knowing exactly what they're listening for. Rivet was back at the window. Owen had moved outside entirely, standing in the parking lot where he could see both the state road and the sky above the tree line in the direction of the depot. Haley had not moved from the counter. At 1 hour 40 minutes, her phone rang. She answered it in the first ring. It was not Shaw. It was a voice she recognized from 14 months of working in an office, the flat, controlled voice of a man who had spent years being the most powerful person in any room and had never needed to raise his pitch to make a point. Calvin Rourke said, "You surprised me, Haley. I thought I had you figured out. 8 months of watching you sleep in that diner, and I genuinely didn't think you had the courage to run into a road in front of 22 motorcycles." Haley's hand tightened on the phone. She looked at Grant. He was already reaching for his own phone to text Shaw. She kept her voice level. "Where is my brother?" "He's perfectly fine," Rourke said. "He's sitting in a very comfortable office, eating a very decent sandwich. He'll continue to be fine as long as this conversation goes in a useful direction." A pause. "You have something that belongs to me. 23 pages of handwritten notes that you compiled over a period of approximately 3 weeks before your termination. I'd like them back. They don't belong to you, Haley said. The information belongs to me. I documented what I observed. That's an interesting interpretation, he said. The law is somewhat more complicated on a question of proprietary business information. He said it with the ease of a man who has had lawyers explain things to him for a long time. But I'm not interested in a legal discussion right now. I'm interested in a practical one. You bring me those pages. Nathan goes home. You go wherever you've been going for the last 8 months. And I don't pursue the matter of the phone that was removed from my employee's possession. And the investigation, she said. Elena Shaw, a short pause. The first one he'd taken. Shaw is building something on sand, he said. She's done it before, and it comes apart. It'll come apart this time, too. Another pause, shorter. I'm offering you a clean exit, Haley. You've caused me some inconvenience. I'm willing to absorb that inconvenience in exchange for the records and your silence going forward. That's a better offer than you're going to get from Shaw, because Shaw's offer requires you to sit in a courtroom and let my attorneys explain to 12 strangers why a fired bookkeeper with no address and no references should be believed over a 30-year business operation. Haley said nothing. Think about your brother, Rourke said. Haley looked at the counter in front of her. She looked at Mara's kitchen, visible through the pass-through, where everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, because Mara ran things with the kind of steady consistency that doesn't require drama or display. She thought about Nathan. She thought about 8 months of concrete floors and stolen bread and running into the beams of 22 headlights because she had run out of options and had decided to spend the last option she had left on 22 strangers instead of herself. She said, I'll bring you the pages. Grant's head came up sharply. She held up one finger to him, one specific, deliberate finger. A signal. Wait, she said to Rourke. I need an hour. You have 45 minutes, he said. Fine, she said. 45 minutes. She hung up. Grant said, What are you doing? She said, I'm not bringing him anything. She put the phone on the counter. But he thinks I am, which means he's going to have his people hold Nathan in place for the next 45 minutes instead of moving him somewhere Shaw can't find him. She looked at Grant. I just bought Shaw 45 minutes. Grant stared at her. Rivet, from the window, said nothing. But something in his posture changed, a slight adjustment, the kind that happens when a person recalibrates their assessment of someone. Grant texted Shaw. He called her directly. Told her 45 minutes. She stalled him. Nathan is still in the building. Shaw replied in 30 seconds. I know. I'm already moving. Tell her I said good. Grant showed Haley the screen. She read it. She set the phone back down. She picked up her coffee cup and found it empty and set it back down. Mara reached over the counter and refilled it without being asked. Haley put her hands around the warm cup and held on. 22 minutes later, Shaw called back. Her voice was different, not louder, but accelerated, the way a person's voice moves when events are moving faster than their ability to narrate them in real time. We're inside, she said. Nathan is secure and unharmed. We have Rourke in the building. We have 2 of his men in custody. We're finding the records room now. A pause, the sound of voices in the background, movement, a door, the keypad. Left side, chest height, exactly where she said it would be. Then Shaw said, wait. The background went quiet. Grant pressed the phone to his ear and looked at Haley, who was reading his face. Shaw came back. Grant, tell Haley we found it. Another pause. Tell her it's more than she thought. The records room. It's not just Rourke's operation. There are files here going back 6 years. County contracts, state freight certifications, correspondence with 3 other operators in the region. A breath. She was right about all of it. About every single thing she copied into those 23 pages. And there's more she didn't know about because she wasn't given access to it. Grant looked at Haley and said, She says you were right. Haley said nothing. She just sat with both hands around the coffee cup and let that sentence exist in the air around her for a moment. The way sentences that have been weighted for a very long time need to be given room before they can be properly received. Grant said into the phone, Rourke. In custody, Shaw said. Deputy Chief Pike has been contacted by the state attorney's office. He's been asked to present himself for questioning. A pause. That's all I can tell you officially. But Grant, we're not done tonight. I need you to stay where you are. Why, he said. Because we found something in the records room that changes the scope of what we're dealing with, she said. And because there's a name in those files that you need to know before it comes out in any other way. She stopped. It's not someone in Rourke's organization. It's someone in the county prosecutor's office. It's been a collaborative relationship for 4 years. Grant absorbed this. So Pike wasn't the only cover, he said. Pike was the visible cover, Shaw said. The structural cover was somewhere Rourke would have needed it to be if he wanted the operation to survive long term. She paused again. I'm telling you this because you're going to need to be prepared for what comes next. This is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. Media, legal proceedings, potentially federal involvement given the interstate freight component. And Haley is going to be at the center of all of it. Grant looked at Haley across the counter. She was watching him with the alert, patient attention of someone who has learned to read outcomes from the expressions of people receiving news about her life. He said into the phone, she can handle it. Shaw said, I know she can. That's why I'm calling you. A pause. Take care of her tonight. I'll be there in the morning. She hung up. Grant set the phone on the counter. He looked at Haley. He looked at Rivet, at Switch, at Doc, at Owen still visible through the window in the parking lot, at Mara in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel over her shoulder, and the particular expression of the woman who has been listening to everything and is waiting for the part where she knows what to do next. He said to Haley, Rourke is in custody. Nathan is safe. Haley's hands on the coffee cup did not move. Her face did not change in any dramatic way. But she closed her eyes for 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, something happened that had no language and needed none. When she opened them, she said, Is it over? Grant said, The hardest part. Yes. She nodded once. She looked at her coffee. She took a drink. Then she said, very quietly, I need to call my brother. And the diner was quiet around her, not the hollow quiet of waiting, but the full quiet of something finally having moved in the right direction while she picked up the phone and dialed the number she hadn't called in 8 months and listened to it ring. Nathan answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was the voice of a man who had just been through something and hadn't finished processing it yet, raw at the edges, careful in the middle, the voice of someone who is choosing every word with the specific deliberateness of a person who understands that they have already said the wrong things too many times and cannot afford another one. Haley, he said. You're out, she said. It wasn't a question. Shaw's people walked me out 20 minutes ago. I'm in a parking lot. A pause. I don't even know whose parking lot. Another pause. Longer. Haley, not tonight, she said. We don't do this tonight. He went quiet. I'm glad you're safe, she said. And she meant it precisely, accurately, without decoration. Not warmly, not coldly. The way you mean a true thing that is not yet complete. Go home, Nathan. Someone from Shaw's office will contact you about a statement. Answer their questions honestly. All of them. Haley, all of them, she said again. Even the ones that make you look bad. Especially those. She hung up. She set the phone on the counter and looked at it for a moment, then looked away. Mara was watching her from the kitchen doorway. Haley met her eyes and said nothing, and Mara nodded, once the nod, of a woman who understands that some conversations end exactly where they need to end, and that the ending is not the same thing as closure. Grant was at the far end of the counter, giving her space. He'd been doing that all evening, positioning himself close enough to be present and far enough to not crowd, which was a skill Haley had noticed and filed without comment. She slid off the stool and walked to the window and stood with her back to the room. The parking lot was dark and empty, except for Owen's shadow near the far corner. The state road beyond it was quiet. The vehicles that had sat there for 2 days were gone. She stood at the window and breathed. What she felt was not what she had expected to feel when this moment came, because she had imagined this moment many times during 8 months of cold nights, the moment when Rourke was in custody and Nathan was safe and the evidence was in the right hands. She had imagined it as relief, as release, as a door swinging open after a long time locked. What it actually felt like was more complicated than any of those things. It felt like the morning after a long illness, not well yet. Not even certain the illness was entirely gone, but different from yesterday in a way that the body registers before the mind catches up. A tentative recalibration. The first breath where breathing didn't feel like an effort. She turned back to the room. "I need to sleep," she said. Nobody argued with her. She went to the back room and sat on the edge of the bed and took off her boots, the first time she had done that inside a building in 8 months, and placed them beside the door within easy reach, and lay down on top of the covers with her jacket folded under her head, and was asleep before the thought of sleep had finished forming. She did not hear Grant tell the remaining 4 riders that they were done for the night. She did not hear Mara lock the front door or Owen come in from the parking lot. She slept the way she had not slept in a very long time, not waiting, not listening, not positioned for rapid departure. Just sleeping. In the morning, Elena Shaw came back. She arrived at 7 with 2 additional investigators and a legal aid attorney named Patricia Osei, who was 38 years old and had spent the last decade working exclusively on cases where institutional power had been used to silence private individuals. Shaw had called Osei the previous evening, apparently, before the depot raid was even complete, which told Grant something about the quality of Shaw's preparation and the seriousness with which she was treating what they'd found in Rourke's records room. Shaw sat down with Haley and OC while the investigators spread documents across the 3 of the diner's tables and began the organized reconstruction of what Rourke's records actually showed. Grant watched from a distance. He watched Haley sit across from OC and answer question after question with the same flat precision she'd shown throughout, not performing credibility, simply being credible, which is a different thing and considerably rarer. At one point, OC said, "You mentioned that you altered a minor invoice. Walk me through that." Haley didn't hesitate. 3 weeks before I was fired, my supervisor told me that a delivery had been logged incorrectly and that I needed to change the destination code on one invoice to reflect where the shipment had actually gone. I made the change. She told me it was a correction. Haley looked at the table. I found out later that the original destination code was the accurate one. The change routed the delivery record to a facility that received relief supplies on paper but wasn't actually receiving them. I changed the code without knowing what I was doing. "And Rourke used that change," OC said. "Yes. He used it as evidence that I had knowingly falsified records, which was true in the technical sense. I had changed a code. Everything he said about what I did was technically accurate." She looked up. "Everything he said about why I did it was a lie." OC wrote for a moment. "Did you tell the police this?" "I told Deputy Chief Pike that my supervisor had instructed me to make the change. He told me that I had no documentation of the instruction and that my supervisor had denied giving it. Had she denied it? I don't know. I never spoke to her after I was fired. Pike told me she denied it. I have no way to verify whether he was telling the truth about what she said." A pause. "Given what I know about Pike now, I have some thoughts on that." OC looked at her for a moment. "You just did something important," she said. Haley waited. "You accurately described your own culpability without minimizing it and without letting it prevent you from describing Rourke's larger culpability." That's OC seemed to measure her words. "That's going to be significant in a courtroom. Because what Rourke's defense is going to argue is that you're an unreliable narrator of events because you yourself made a falsification. And what you just demonstrated is that you can hold both things at once, your mistake and his crime, and describe them both accurately. That's credibility." She set her pen down. "It's rarer than you'd think." Haley said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I've had 8 months to think about what I did wrong." "It gives you a lot of time to get the story accurate," OC said. "No. People use that time to rationalize. You used it to be honest. That's a choice." Haley looked at the window. The morning moved forward. Shaw emerged from the document review at 10 o'clock and came to find Grant, who was at the counter with coffee he'd been nursing for an hour. She sat down beside him and said, without preamble, "The scope is larger than I described last night. The name in the county prosecutor's office, it's Assistant Prosecutor Dale Wyman. He's been providing Rourke with advance notice of complaint filings, investigative timelines, and the identities of potential witnesses for at least 4 years. In exchange for what appears to be a consultancy arrangement with one of Rourke's affiliated LLCs. Grant absorbed this. Wyman processed your club's complaint about the warehouse robbery attribution, Shaw said. The one that started all of this. Grant set down his cup. He killed it. He buried it in a procedural hold that had no legal basis. The hold was never reviewed because nobody above Wyman had reason to look at it. Shaw looked at her notebook. It's also how Rourke knew your club was coming that night. The intermediary who approached you about the meeting, he was flagged to Wyman's office through a complaint mechanism. Wyman ran the name, identified the club connection, and passed it to Rourke. Grant said very quietly, "So the whole thing, the offer, the motorcycles, the documentation they supposedly had, the meeting at the depot, Rourke built all of it on information he got from inside the prosecutor's office." "Yes," Shaw said. And if Haley hadn't been behind that diner," Grant said, "if she hadn't been close enough to the depot to see what they were staging, if she hadn't gotten close enough to take that phone, then yes," Shaw said. "All 22 of you." She didn't finish the sentence because it didn't need finishing. Grant picked up his coffee cup. He held it without drinking. He said, "How long before this becomes public?" The arrest warrants for Rourke and his 2 crew members were executed last night. Wyman was placed on administrative leave this morning at 8 o'clock. Pending investigation, the state attorney's office made that call, not the county. Pike has been suspended without pay, pending the outcome of an internal affairs review. Shaw closed her notebook. It'll be on the local news by noon, regional by tonight. Depending on how the federal freight angle develops, potentially national within the week. And Haley, Grant said. Haley is going to be described as a key witness and informant, Shaw said. I've asked the initial release to use her name rather than anonymous source or homeless woman, which is what the first draft said. I've been told that's been corrected. She paused. She deserves to be named. What she did was specific, and it was brave, and it had a name attached to it. Grant said, she's going to need support through the trial. She has OC, Shaw said. OC is excellent, but yes, beyond the legal. She's going to need stability, community, a place where what she is isn't defined by what happened to her. Shaw looked at him steadily. That's not my department. It's yours, I know, he said. The news broke at 11:40. Mara had a small television behind the counter that she never turned on during business hours. She turned it on. The report led with Rourke's arrest, described the freight fraud and stolen parts operation, mentioned the attempted ambush at the underpass without full details, and identified Haley Morgan, 20 years old, as the witness whose evidence had been central to the investigation. The reporter called her a young woman who had been living homeless in the Red Mesa area. Not wrong, not sufficient, but a beginning. Haley watched the report from a stool at the counter. She watched her name appear on the screen. She watched without visible emotion, and then the report ended, and she said, "They said I was homeless like it's the most important thing about me." Mara said, "It's the most dramatic detail." Reporters pick the dramatic detail. "I'm also a trained bookkeeper," Haley said. "I'm also the person who built the documentation that actually supports the case. I'm also the person who stalled Rourke on the phone last night for 45 minutes to give Shaw time to move." She wasn't angry, exactly. "Homeless is what I am. It's not what I did," no, Mara said. "It's not." Grant said, "I'll call the reporter." Haley looked at him. "Don't make it about the club," she said. "Don't. I don't want this to be a story about bikers rescuing a homeless girl. That's not what happened." "I know what happened," he said. "Make sure they do too," she said. He called the reporter. He was on the phone for 11 minutes. He was specific, and he was clear, and he was not asking for anything for the club. He described what Haley had done in the sequence that it had actually happened, the warning, the phone, the documentation she'd built and preserved over 8 months, the stall call that had bought Shaw her operational window. When he hung up, the reporter had agreed to a follow-up piece with Haley's name and contribution at the center. He told Haley this. She said, "Thank you." He said, "You did the work. The story should be accurate." That afternoon, Nathan came to the diner. He drove himself, which took something. He walked in the front door and stood just inside it and looked at his sister sitting at the counter, and there was a quality to the way he stood that had the particular difficulty of a person who has rehearsed a moment many times and has arrived at it and found that none of the rehearsal prepared them adequately for the reality of the other person's face. He was 34. He had the same pale blue eyes as Haley. He had not apparently been sleeping well, which Haley could see from across the room, and which she understood because she had not been sleeping well for 8 months before she started sleeping in Mara's back room. Mara looked at Haley. Haley said, "Give us a minute." Mara went to the kitchen. Grant and Doc moved to the far end of the diner without being asked, which was the kind of thing that Grant's particular leadership style produced in the people around him, an instinct for the appropriate distance. Nathan sat down across from his sister, he said. I believed him. Haley said, "I know. I want to say I had reasons that I didn't know, that the evidence," he stopped. "But the truth is, I had a choice between believing you and believing him, and believing him was easier, and I chose easier." He looked at his hands on the table. "You're my sister. I should have. You should have," Haley said. He looked up at the flatness of it. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," she said. "It's not okay. I slept on a concrete floor for 8 months. Her voice was steady. "I hid food in my jacket because I didn't know when I'd eat next. I ran into the road in front of 22 motorcycles at highway speed because I had run out of every other option." She held his gaze. "None of that is okay." "I know," he said. His voice broke on the second word. "And you're my brother," she said. "And I'm not going to tell you we're done. But I'm also not going to tell you we're fine, because we're not fine yet." She looked at him with the particular directness of someone who has had a very long time to decide exactly what they believe. "If you want to be in my life going forward, you're going to have to earn it. Not apologize for it. Earn it. Show up for the court hearings. Help me restore my documentation. When people in this town talk about what happened, tell them accurately, including your part in it. No version where you're the sympathetic brother who was deceived. The version where you made a choice and are making a different one now." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay," she said. She didn't reach across the table. She didn't soften it. She let it stand exactly as it was, a door not closed, not fully open, cracked to the width of future action. That was what she could offer him honestly. And she had decided months ago that honesty was the only currency she was willing to use anymore. He left an hour later. He didn't embrace her. He shook her hand, which was strange and also exactly right for what they were at that moment. She watched him walk out the door and drive away, and then she turned back to the counter, and Mara was already there with coffee. "He'll show up," Mara said. "Maybe," Haley said. "He came today," Mara said. "That's data." Haley almost smiled like Shaw. "Shaw is smart," Mara said. "I'll take the comparison." The next 3 weeks moved with the controlled velocity of legal proceeding, faster than ordinary life, slower than what anyone involved wanted. Rourke's attorney filed 4 procedural motions in the first 10 days. 3 were denied. The 4th delayed the preliminary hearing by 1 week. Wyman was formally charged on day 16, which generated a second wave of media coverage that was more specifically focused on the systemic dimension, not just one corrupt businessman, but the network of institutional cover that had made his operation sustainable. That coverage named Haley differently. Not homeless woman. Witness. Bookkeeper. The person who built and preserved the documentary record that anchored the case. OC prepared her for deposition. They met every other day for 2 weeks in a conference room at the legal aid office that OC had arranged through a state program. Haley was, OC told Grant privately, the most prepared deponent she had worked with in 11 years. Not because she was unaffected, she was affected, visibly at various points, but because she had decided that the truth was the thing she was going to give, and she had already made peace with what the truth cost. During those weeks, something else happened that nobody had planned or orchestrated. Three other people came forward. A warehouse worker from Rourke's operation who had been quietly documenting delivery discrepancies for 7 months and hadn't known what to do with what he had. A former county contractor who had been pressured into signing off on deliveries he hadn't received. A woman named Clara Betts, 62 years old, a retired school administrator who had served on the board of a shelter that was supposed to have received a relief supply shipment 2 winters earlier. The blankets and generator fuel that Haley had identified in her records as diverted. Clara had filed a complaint at the time. It had been received by Wyman's office. She had never heard back. When Clara Betts walked into OC's office on the 12th day and introduced herself and produced her copy of the original complaint receipt, OC called Shaw immediately. Shaw's response, verbatim as OC related to Grant later, was, "This is the pattern. Once the first person speaks, the others realize they're not alone. That's always how it works. That's why silence is the only thing these operations actually need to survive." Grant relayed this to Haley. Haley said, 3 people. After 8 months of nothing. 3 so far, Grant said. She looked at the window. How many were there before me? Who saw something and who didn't have a waterproof bag and 8 months and nowhere else to go? Grant said, I don't know, a lot, she said. I think a lot. He didn't argue with her. The club had not been inactive during those weeks, but it had been invisible, which was intentional. Grant had instructed his people to stay away from the investigation's public footprint, no statements, no presence at court filings, no visible connection to the legal proceedings that might allow anyone to reframe the story as a biker club operating outside legitimate channels. They were witnesses. They were not actors. The line mattered, and Grant enforced it without apology. What the club did quietly was start working on the abandoned roadside diner. It began with Owen, who drove past it one morning and stopped and sat in his truck for a while, and then called Grant and said, the building is structurally sound. Roof is solid. The windows need replacing and the interior needs gutting, but the bones are good. Grant said, why are you telling me this? Owen said, because Haley lived here for 8 months, and the club has 17 riders between us who know how to build things, and I'm asking you if we're going to do something about that or just let it sit. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, does it belong to anyone? Tax records show a deceased owner with no living heirs and no active estate proceeding. It's been sitting in county administrative limbo for 6 years. Then let's find out who to talk to about it, Grant said. Mara made those calls. She was better at them than Grant, for reasons that had to do with her particular ability to navigate administrative systems with the patience and precision of someone who has run a small business in a complicated county for 20 years. She spent a week on the phone and at the county records office and emerged from the process with a 6-month provisional occupancy agreement and the name of the county administrator who would handle the formal transfer if the building was brought up to code within that period. She told Haley about it on a Wednesday evening after the dinner service. Haley said, why? Mara said, because you slept there. Because it needs to be something. Mara, Haley said. It's not charity, Mara said, which was the same thing she'd said the first night, because she'd understood from the beginning that this was the word Haley needed to hear and would keep needing to hear until she stopped needing to hear it. The club provides labor. I handle the administrative process. You eventually, when the trial is done and you have a minute to think about what comes next, you tell us what you want it to be. Haley looked at the table. She had been doing this, looking at the table when she was processing something she hadn't prepared for 3 weeks now, and Grant had come to recognize it as a sign that the processing was genuine rather than performed. She said, I have conditions, Mara said. I'm serious, Haley said. I know you're serious, Mara said. That's not the same as telling you your conditions are unreasonable. Haley looked up. I earn my wages the same as any other employee. No special arrangements, no charity rate, No consideration for what I've been through. I work for what I'm paid. Done, Mara said. Part of the space I don't know how much. We figure that out based on what's realistic, becomes a resource station for homeless young adults. Food identification assistance, legal referrals, temporary work connections. Not a shelter, a station. A place people can come and get actual help with the specific things that keep people from getting back to stable. Mara said, that's a good idea. I'm not done, Haley said. The club does not use this place or what happened here to build its reputation. No press releases, no publicity, no fundraising that centers the club's involvement. If someone asks who built it, the answer is the community. She paused. Including the club, because the club is part of the community, but not the centerpiece. Mara looked at her for a moment. Then she said, I'm going to tell Grant you said that. I'll tell him myself, Haley said. She did. That evening, she found Grant at the counter after the diner had cleared out and sat down beside him and told him all 3 conditions in sequence without softening any of them. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, agreed. She looked at him. You're not going to argue. Any no, he said. They're reasonable. And they're right. He picked up his coffee cup. The third one especially. She said, why especially? He said, because the moment this becomes about us, it stops being about what it's actually about, which is you and the people who come after you. He set the cup down. We stopped motorcycles on a highway. That's the extent of our heroism in this story. Everything else was yours. Haley looked at the counter. You gave me a room, she said. You listened. You held your people back when everything in them wanted to charge forward. You called Elena Shaw instead of calling Pike. She paused. Don't minimize that. I'm not minimizing it, he said. I'm putting it in its right proportion. She thought about this. Okay, she said. Right proportion, he agreed. The trial date was set for 7 weeks out. In the intervening period, Rourke's attorney attempted 3 additional strategies that each, in sequence, collapsed against the weight of the documentation Haley had produced and the 3 additional witnesses who had emerged after her. The attempted character assault on Haley's credibility, the focus on her housing situation, her termination, the altered invoice was the one Grant had been watching for, and it arrived in the form of a pretrial motion to exclude her testimony on the grounds that her records were produced under circumstances that constituted theft of proprietary business information. Osei's response to that motion was 11 pages long and cited 7 precedents. The motion was denied in 4 days. Haley read the denial order sitting at Mara's counter and said, 11 pages. Osei on the phone said, it was a weak motion. It deserved a thorough response. Did they really think it would work? Haley said. They thought it might delay things long enough to be useful, Osei said. It didn't. You're cleared to testify. We start trial prep next Monday. Haley said, I know what I'm going to say. Osei said, I know you do. We're doing prep anyway. I know, Haley said. Trial prep was 10 sessions. Haley was, as Osei had predicted to Grant, extraordinarily prepared. Not unshakable, there were 2 sessions where specific lines of cross-examination reached something that required a break, both of them connected to the period after her eviction. And before she found the abandoned diner, which was the period she had the least narrative armor around. But she came back from both breaks and continued, and Osei noted, without making a production of it, that the ability to take a break and return was itself a form of strength that many witnesses lacked. On the day before testimony began, Rivet came to the diner alone. He sat at the counter and ordered coffee and sat with it without saying anything for a while. Haley was going through documents at the far end of the counter. He said, without looking at her, I called you a liar on the highway. She looked up. I said it out loud, he said. In front of 21 other people. I called you bait. She looked at him. I know, I was there. I know you know. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I'm saying it out loud again because I want to be accountable for it. Not because I want you to forgive me, and not because I'm trying to make myself feel better about it. Because accountability means saying it clearly, not hoping the other person figures out you regret it from context. Haley put her pen down. He continued, "You were a 20-year-old woman standing in a road in the dark, in a torn jacket, with a cracked phone. And I looked at you, and my first instinct was that you were a weapon being pointed at us. And I said it." He looked at his cup. "I was wrong. Not just about you specifically. About what it means when someone who has nothing left puts herself in danger to help strangers." Haley was quiet for a moment. She said, "Why does it happen?" "The instinct." He looked up. "Not just you," she said. "Everyone. The police officer who heard my report and decided I was the problem. My brother. The landlord who evicted me without asking questions. Why is the instinct always to discount the person who has the least?" "Rivet thought about this," he said, "because doubting you costs nothing, and believing you costs something. So people do the math, and they pick the cheaper option." Haley looked at the counter. "That's honest," she said. "You deserve honest," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine," she said. "But I'll tell you this, you didn't walk away. After you called me a liar, you stayed. You listened when Grant made the case. You didn't act on your instinct." She paused. "That's the part that mattered. The instinct was wrong. What you did with it wasn't." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "The phone. The cracked prepaid." "When this is over, I know," she said. "Grant told me." He had told her the previous week what Rivet had been planning. The damaged phone, the thing she had risked everything to take off an oil drum and run 2 hours through cold desert to deliver, was going to be framed. Not hidden, not stored. Displayed. Behind the counter of whatever the abandoned diner became. Because Rivet had decided, in his particular way of deciding things, that the object that had started everything should stay visible. A reminder of what dismissal costs. A reminder that the cracked and damaged things are sometimes carrying the most important messages. She had said when Grant told her, "That's his choice." Grant had said, "He knows that. He wanted you to know it too." Now she said to Rivet directly, "Put it somewhere people can see it." He said, "That's the plan." He finished his coffee. He left. Haley watched him go and then looked at the document in front of her and picked up her pen and went back to work. The morning of testimony arrived with the particular quality of mornings that have been anticipated long enough that the arrival feels both expected and surreal. Haley dressed in clothes that Mara had helped her acquire, not new, not showy, exactly appropriate. Pressed slacks, a dark blue blouse, the boots she'd been wearing for months, resoled at a cobbler's Owen had recommended. She looked in the mirror for a long moment. She did not look like the woman who had run into the road. She looked like the woman who had built a case in the dark and kept it safe for 8 months on a concrete floor and had walked it into the right hands intact. Those were the same woman. That was the point. Grant drove her to the courthouse. They didn't talk much on the way, which was right. At the entrance, he stopped and said, "You don't need me to tell you anything." "I know," she said. "But for what it's worth," he said, "I've seen a lot of people under pressure in my life. You're the best I've seen." She looked at him. He said, "Not because you're fearless, because you're not and you do it anyway." She said, "Grant, yeah. If I start crying in there," she said, "don't come in." He almost smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." She walked in. Osase was waiting. They sat together for 20 minutes before the session began, and OC talked about something entirely unrelated to the case, a restaurant she'd been to the previous weekend, the parking situation near the courthouse, the coffee in the attorney's lounge, which was a technique, and also, Haley suspected, genuine preference. OC was the kind of person who had learned to carry both purposes at once. When Haley took the stand, the courtroom had the quality of rooms where important things are decided, formal but not cold, weighted but not oppressive. She stated her name. She stated her former employment. She stated the date she had first identified a discrepancy in the freight invoices. And then, for the next 4 hours, she told the truth. All of it. The invoice she had changed at her supervisor's instruction. The records she had copied by hand. The report she had filed with Pike. The eviction. The 8 months. The phone on the oil drum. The highway. The 22 headlights. She told it in the order it had happened, and she held every piece of it steady. And when Rourke's attorney asked her twice, In two different formulations, whether she had a personal grudge against Calvin Rourke that might motivate her to fabricate or exaggerate her testimony, she said both times, I had and still have a desire to see an accurate account of what happened. If that constitutes a personal interest, then yes, I have one. The attorney tried a third formulation. O.C. objected. The judge sustained it. When she stepped down from the stand, she walked out of the courtroom without looking at O'Rourke. She had decided she was not going to give him her eyes. He had had 8 months of her fear and her silence and her hiding, and he had had the days of legal maneuvering. And he had had his attorney's attempts to make her doubt her own memory in front of a judge. He could not have the way she looked leaving. Grant was in the hallway. He said nothing. She said nothing. They walked out of the building together and stood in the cold November air, which was exactly the same temperature as the air on the highway a month earlier, and she breathed it and felt it move through her. That's done, she said. That part is, he said. She looked at the street. The diner, she said. The abandoned one. When do you start? Owen said his crew can start on the windows next weekend, Grant said. If the county permits clear. They'll clear, she said. Mara handled them. Then next weekend, he said. She nodded. She stood in the cold and thought about 22 people stopping on a highway because she had decided to spend herself on them. She thought about the cracked phone and the oil drum and the frozen November road and the bread she had put in her jacket and taken out again and put back. She thought about what Rivet had said, that doubting her cost nothing and believing her cost something, and people picked the cheaper option. She thought about making the cheaper option more expensive, about building a place that made it slightly harder to look away from people who were easy to ignore. One building at a time, one person at a time, starting, maybe, with whatever frightened person walked in off the street and needed someone to put a warm thing in front of them and say, I see you. You don't have to explain everything tonight. Start with this. The trial continued. The verdict would come. The building would be built. Nathan would either show up or he wouldn't, and she would deal honestly with whichever it was. She had 23 pages of handwritten notes and a state investigator's confirmation that every word of them was accurate. And a legal aid attorney who had called her the most prepared deponent she'd worked with in 11 years, and a room above a diner with a door that locked and work to do in the morning. It was enough. It was, in fact, considerably more than enough. She had started with nothing left to lose. Look where she was standing now. The verdict came on a Thursday. Haley was at the diner when O.C. called not the abandoned one, not yet, but Mara's, where she had been working the morning shift and had been doing so every day for 6 weeks, with the kind of reliability that Mara had stopped commenting on because it had become simply true, the way reliable things become true when they stop needing acknowledgement. She was running a supply invoice against the previous month's order when her phone buzzed on the counter, and she looked at the screen and saw O.C.'s name and set the pen down and answered it before the second ring. O.C. said guilty. All 7 counts. Haley put her free hand flat on the counter. Rourke, she said. All 7. Freight fraud, falsification of public records, obstruction, bribery, theft of public assistance funds, all of it. A pause. Wyman pled out last week rather than go to jury. 17 months and a permanent bar from public office. Pike took the same deal this morning. The judge accepted both. Another pause, shorter. It's done, Haley. Haley stood at the counter with her hand flat on it and said nothing for a moment. Are you there? O.C. said. I'm here. She said, say something. She thought about what to say. She thought about the oil drum and the cracked phone and the November cold and the 22 headlights coming at her out of the dark. She thought about 23 pages of handwritten notes sealed inside a waterproof bag buried in the corner of an abandoned building. She thought about the bread she had pocketed and repocketed and finally left on a counter because she had decided in that small specific moment to practice not needing it. She said, thank you for every single session, for 11 pages of response to a motion that didn't deserve 2, for never once asking me why I didn't have more. O.C. said, you built the case. I carried it. We carried it, Haley said. A pause. Yes, O.C. said. She hung up and stood at the counter for another moment. Mara came through from the kitchen and looked at her face and stopped. Guilty, Haley said. Mara set down what she was carrying, walked around the counter, and put her arms around Haley Morgan for the first time. It was not a tentative gesture. It was the full, deliberate embrace of a woman who had been waiting for the right moment and knew she had reached it. Haley stood inside it for a count of 3 and then put her own arms up and held on. And they stood that way in the middle of the diner for a moment that neither of them would describe afterward because some things work better without description. When Mara stepped back, she said, "I'm going to make breakfast." Haley said, "It's 11:30. "Then I'm going to make late breakfast," Mara said, and went back to the kitchen. Grant heard before Haley could call him because O.C. had called him simultaneously, which Haley found out when her phone rang 90 seconds later, and his voice came through with the particular quality it had when something significant had happened, and he was being careful not to perform a reaction that wasn't genuinely his. He said, "You heard." "I heard," she said. "How do you feel?" She thought about this honestly. The way she thought about most things now, not quickly, not with the first word that arrived, but with the word that was actually true. "Like something heavy has been put down," she said. "Not gone." "Put down," he said. "That's right. It doesn't fix 8 months," she said. "No," he said. "But it means the 8 months were worth something." She said, "They were always worth something, whether he was convicted or not. I knew what I knew." A pause on his end. "You're right," he said. "I said that badly." "You didn't say it badly," she said. "You said it the way people say things when they want the hard part to be over. I understand the impulse." She looked at the counter in front of her, at the invoice she'd been checking when the phone rang. "When are we opening the building?" He said. "Owen says 2 more weekends of work. Maybe 3 too," she said. "Push for 2, he said. "I'll tell Owen," she said. "Tell Rivet to bring the phone." A pause. "He already has it," Grant said. "He's been carrying it in his jacket since the night we left the depot. I think he's been waiting for a reason to put it somewhere permanent." Haley looked at the window. "Tell him this is the reason." "I will," Grant said. She hung up. She picked up the pen. She finished checking the invoice against the previous month's order, found a $4 discrepancy in the produce line, noted it on a Post-it, and stuck it to the page for Mara. Then she went to the kitchen and told Mara what the discrepancy was and how she intended to address it with the supplier. And Mara listened and said, "Do it," and handed her a plate of eggs she hadn't asked for. She ate them standing at the counter. That was Thursday. The following Monday, Nathan showed up at Mara's diner at 8 in the morning. He had told Haley he would come. He had called the previous week to say he'd be there, and she had said fine, and he had come. He sat at the counter and had coffee and did not make a speech about it. He had attended every court session he could schedule around work. He had given his own witness statement to Shaw's office in which he accurately described his decision to disbelieve his sister and the reasons for it, which the investigative record would show was not legally necessary, but which he had offered voluntarily, and which Haley had been told about by Shaw in a tone that suggested Shaw considered it significant. Nathan drank his coffee. Haley came out from the kitchen and sat down across the counter from him. They talked about ordinary things, his work schedule, the road department project he was managing, a neighbor's dog that had been getting into his garbage. After 20 minutes, he said, "I want to help with the building, the one the club is working on." She said, "What can you do?" He said, "I run heavy equipment for the county, but I can swing a hammer and I know electrical basics and I've got a truck." She said, "Talk to Owen Price. He's coordinating the construction crew. Tell him I sent you." He said, "Okay." He finished his coffee. He left. Haley watched him go and then turned back to the work she was doing, which was a revised supplier contact list she'd been building for the resource station component of the new space food banks, identification assistance programs, legal aid referrals, temporary work registries. She had been building it for 3 weeks in the gaps between her other work, quietly and systematically the way she built everything. Mara came out and looked at the list. She said, "This is good," Haley said. It's a start, Mara said. That's what I said. The building took 2 weekends and 4 days. Owen's crew worked with the focused efficiency of people doing something they had decided mattered, which was different from working for money, and visibly so. Nathan showed up both weekends. He didn't say much. He worked alongside Owen and 3 other riders and a man named Curtis who had come to help because Owen had mentioned the project at a fuel stop and Curtis had said he knew how to tile. On the second weekend, Haley came out and worked alongside them, not inspecting, working, her hands in the same paint and lumber and drywall compound as everyone else's. On the afternoon of the second Saturday, she and Rivet found themselves working on the same section of wall without having unplanned it. He was priming, she was taping. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, which was comfortable rather than awkward. The silence of 2 people who had said the things that needed saying and could now exist without filling the space between them. He said, "You know what the name means? The 22nd mile." She kept taping. 22 riders, she said. And the mile nobody sees. The one past the point where most people stop. He said, "Grant said it was your idea." Grant said, "It should be named after the thing that happened," she said. "I said the thing that happened was 22 people stopping when they didn't have to." He said you could argue it the other way, that it was one person running when she had every reason not to. We compromised on a name that holds both. Rivet said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's a good compromise," she said. "I've gotten better at those." He almost smiled. She saw it from the corner of her eye and said nothing about it. Because some things land better when they're not pointed at. The day before the opening, Rivet mounted the frame behind the counter. It was simple dark wood, glass front, just large enough for the phone and a small card beneath it. He had written the card himself, which surprised no one who knew him, because Rivet was a man who, when he had committed to something, committed completely. The card read, "This phone was taken from an oil drum on a cold November night by a 20-year-old woman who had nothing left to lose and used it to save 22 lives. We almost didn't listen. We're still working on that." Haley read it when the frame went up. She said, "Change one thing." He said, "What?" She said she didn't save 22 lives. She saved 22 lives and then spent 8 months living in this building to do it. Put that in. He looked at the card. He looked at her. He said, "I'll rewrite it." He did. The opening was not an event in the way that events are usually organized. No ribbon, no formal program, no press release. Grant had offered, in a tone of voice that was not quite asking and not quite insisting, to generate some coverage, and Haley had looked at him with the specific expression she deployed when offers needed to be declined without hostility, and he had withdrawn the offer without argument. What happened instead was that Mara opened the doors at 9 in the morning on a Saturday in late January. And the people who came because someone had told them about it, and the people who had told them had heard about it from someone else. And the chain of information had traveled the way information travels in small communities, organically, imperfectly, but arriving where it needed to go. By 11 o'clock, 40 people had come through, some to see the space. Some to eat. Mara had set up a satellite kitchen operation that would eventually become a permanent weekend service. Some came to the resource station corner, where a folding table held the supplier contact list Haley had been building for a month, and where a sign said, "If you need food, ID help, legal referral, or temporary work, sit down and we'll figure out what we have." 3 people sat down at that table in the first hour. Haley handled 2 of them herself. The third she referred to Ose, who had volunteered to staff the legal referral component 2 Saturdays a month and had shown up that morning with coffee and a folder of intake forms. At noon, Grant arrived with the 18 riders who hadn't stayed through the investigation. They came as a group, parked in the lot, came inside in clusters, had food, looked at the space. Several of them found work to do: a door hinge that was sticking, a shelf bracket that needed resetting, and did it without being asked, because that was who they were. And Haley was beginning to understand that this was simply a fact about them, rather than a performance. Doc sat with the resource station for an hour and talked to a young man who came in off the street with the specific expression. Haley recognized the expression she had been wearing for 8 months. The one that means I need something, and I don't know if I'm allowed to need it here. Doc talked to him the way Doc talked to everyone, without clinical distance, without manufactured warmth, just directly and specifically, and with the full attention of a man who has learned that attention itself is a form of medicine. The young man left with 3 referrals and a plate of food and the knowledge that he could come back on the following Saturday. Switch arrived at 2 and stood in front of the frame behind the counter for a long moment. He read the revised card. He looked at the cracked phone inside the glass and then turned to find Haley and said, "The serial number on the SIM. I ran it 6 weeks ago against the regional database." Rourke's communications team had 6 phones in rotation that night. This was the one assigned to his senior logistics coordinator. He paused. If you'd taken any of the other 5, the deleted messages wouldn't have been recoverable. They were on the carrier's server. This one, the coordinator had downloaded the thread locally. That's why I could pull 60% of it. Haley looked at him. "You're saying if I'd grabbed a different phone, the deleted content would have been gone," Switch said. "What we had would have been enough for Shaw to move, probably. But the upstream connection Wyman, the state-level correspondence that all lived in the deleted thread." He paused. "You picked the right phone off the right oil drum in the dark," Haley said. "I grabbed the first one I could reach." Switch said, "I know." She looked at the frame on the wall. "Don't tell Grant that," she said. Switch said, "Why not?" "Because he'll find a way to make it mean something mystical, and I need him to understand it was luck and then work." She looked at the phone behind the glass. "That's the whole story. Luck gets you the opening. Work builds everything after." Switch looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Can I quote you on that?" She said, "Only if you fact-check it first." He almost laughed. The day moved through its hours in the way good days move quickly, as Seneca, slowly at the edges, with the particular full quality of a day where many things that were supposed to happen did happen, and some things that weren't planned happened anyway and were better for being unplanned. Clara Betts came. She was 62 and had the bearing of a woman who had spent decades expecting institutions to behave correctly and had not given up on that expectation despite considerable evidence. She sat with Haley for half an hour at the resource station and described what the shelter board had needed during the winter when the relief shipment didn't arrive. And Haley listened with the specific quality of listening that stores information for use. At the end of the half hour, Clara said, "I want to be involved here, not as a donor, as a volunteer." Haley said, "Every other Saturday, 10 to 2. Show up and I'll put you to work." Clara said, "I'll be here." She was. At 3 in the afternoon, the first teenager came in alone. She was 16 or 17, hard to say exactly, wearing too little for the temperature, and carrying a backpack that had everything she owned in it by the look of the weight and the care with which she set it down. She stood just inside the door with the particular expression of someone who has walked into a place, having spent a long time deciding whether to walk into it, and who is waiting to find out whether the decision was a mistake. Haley saw her from across the room. She left what she was doing. She walked to the counter. She picked up a plate that Mara had set out eggs and toast, the same thing that had been set in front of her on her first morning at Mara's Roadhouse, and she carried it to the table nearest the door and set it down. She sat down across from the girl. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask how long she'd been out. She didn't ask where she was going or where she'd come from or what she needed. She looked at the girl, the defensive posture, the too careful way she held herself, the eyes that were doing the same calculation Haley's had done for 8 months. Is this safe? Is this real? Is this going to cost me something I can't afford? Haley said, "You don't have to tell me anything tonight. Come inside. Eat something. The food's free. The door locks from the inside. And nobody here is going to ask you questions you're not ready to answer." The girl looked at the plate. She looked at Haley. She said, "How do you know I'm not going to steal something?" Haley said, "I don't. But that's my problem to manage, not a condition of you eating." The girl looked at the plate again. Something in her face shifted by a degree that was barely visible, but was To Haley, perfectly legible. She sat down. She picked up the fork. Mara, from behind the counter, caught Haley's eye and said nothing. She didn't need to. Owen was at the door frame and saw it, and turned to where Grant was standing nearby and said, quietly, "That's what this place is for." Grant watched Haley sit across from the teenager with the full, patient attention of someone who has all the time in the world for the specific person in front of her, and he said, "Yes, that's exactly what it's for." The day continued to move. The afternoon gave way to the early evening. People came and went. The resource table stayed staffed. The food stayed warm. The frame behind the counter held the cracked phone behind its glass, and the card that Rivet had rewritten with both truths in it, and the people who came and looked at it the way people look at things that hold a compressed history, with the specific attention that objects earn when they have been part of something real. At 5:30, as the first day wound toward its close, Grant found Haley near the back of the space, where she was reviewing the resource referral forms from the day's 3-station appointments. He stood beside her without interrupting. She finished what she was reading, set it down, and looked at him. He said, "How are you?" She said, "Tired. Good tired." He said, "I want to ask you something." She said, "Okay." He said, "A year ago, on that highway, what were you thinking when you ran into the road?" She looked at him. It was a question she had not been asked before, not by Shaw, not by Osei, not in the deposition, not by reporters. Everyone had asked what she knew and what she did and why she did it. Nobody had asked what she was thinking in the specific moment she made the decision. She said, "I was thinking that I had already lost everything I was afraid of losing. My job, my apartment, my brother, my name. Rourke had taken all of it. And I was standing in the cold watching 22 people ride towards something he'd built. And I thought," she paused, "I thought that the only thing I had left was the choice of what I did with it. And I didn't want to use the last thing I had left on nothing." Grant was quiet. She said, "I wasn't being brave. I was being exact. I had one option. I used it," he said. "That's what brave is." She looked at him. He said, "It's not having options and choosing the courageous one. It's being down to one and using it anyway." She absorbed this. She picked up the referral forms and set them in the folder. She said, "We need a better intake form. The current one is 3 questions. We need 7, he said. Write the other 4. She said, "I already did. They're on Mara's counter." He almost smiled. "Of course they are." She said, "Grant," he said. "Yeah." She said, 22 of you stopped." He said, "You made us stop," she said. "I ran into the road. You stopped yourselves. Don't take that away from you." She held his gaze. "You turned 22 motorcycles around in the dark because the calculation changed. Because a person you had no reason to trust handed you information that changed what you knew, and you used it instead of dismissing it." She paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually the rarest thing." He said, "What's the rarest thing?" She said, "Being willing to update. Most people can't do it. They get to the decision, and the decision becomes who they are, and the new information is a threat to that, Septa. You got new information on a dark highway at 50 miles an hour, and you stopped." He said, "I had to lay down some brake." She said, "That's the metaphor." "Yes." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes without preparation, and it lasted for a moment and then settled, and in the settling, it left something lighter in the room between them, not smaller, lighter. The difference between weight carried alone and weight distributed across enough hands to make it manageable. The year passed. Not quickly, the way stories sometimes make years pass, but the way years actually pass, full of weeks that moved at different speeds, of mornings that were harder than expected, and afternoons that were better, of small compound progressions that didn't feel significant in the moment and were unmistakably significant in aggregate. The 22nd mile became what Haley had said it would become. Not a shelter, a station. A place where people came through and left with something specific and actionable: a document replaced, a referral made, a meal eaten, a work contact established, a legal question answered. OC kept her 2 Saturdays a month and brought 2 additional legal aid volunteers by spring. Clara Betts became the intake coordinator, and restructured the 7-question form into 9 questions that she had field tested and refined with the same methodical attention she'd applied to school administration for 30 years. Doc came when he could and established a weekly informal health check-in that was not medical care and was not positioned as such, but was the kind of attentive conversation with a trained person that sometimes catches things before they require emergency care. Nathan showed up every other weekend. Sometimes he had something to fix. Sometimes he just sat at the counter and had coffee and helped with whatever needed helping with. He and Haley had found a rhythm that was not the rhythm of siblings who had never been through anything. It was the rhythm of people who had broken something between them and were building a different version of it from the fragments. Slower, more deliberate, more honest about its own construction. He never asked her to forgive him for the 8 months. He had understood, from the conversation in the diner, that forgiveness was not the right currency. What she had asked for was accuracy and consistency, and what he gave her was both. And the thing that grew from that was not reconciliation, the Hollywood sense, but something more durable, a relationship built on declared behavior rather than declared intention. She trusted demonstrated behavior. She had built her entire adult life on it, starting from the oil drum and the cold November night and the 22 headlights coming through the dark. The anniversary came on a Saturday, exactly 1 year after the highway. The same month, the same cold, the same quality of November, dark arriving early in the Nevada desert. Grant had asked, months earlier, if the 22 riders could gather at the underpass on the date. Not a ceremony, not a production, just the same people, the same road together. Haley had said yes. She rode out with Mara in Mara's truck. The 22 motorcycles were already there. When they arrived, parked in a loose group on the shoulder, engines off, riders standing in the cold air that the 22 of them had ridden through 1 year ago towards something that would have ended them. Haley got out of the truck and walked to the group and stood beside Grant. Nobody made a speech. Nobody needed to. They stood at the underpass for a few minutes in the dark and the cold, and then Rivet came and stood beside Haley and said, "What do you remember most?" She didn't have to think about it. "That all 22 of you stopped," she said. "You stopped, when most people would have kept going." She looked at the underpass. My whole life before that night, the thing I kept learning over and over was that people don't stop for you. They don't slow down. They don't look at you. They definitely don't change course. And then 22 of you did. She paused. That changed something in how I understand what's possible. Rivet said, "You changed something in how we understand what's important." She looked at him. He said, "We came out here thinking we were going to get motorcycles back and clear our name. We went home with something we didn't know we were missing." He looked at the underpass. None of us were going to get changed by a freight dispute in Red Mesa, Nevada. But a 20-year-old woman ran into the road, and here we are. Grant, from beside her, said quietly, "You stopped us from going forward to the wrong thing, and you pulled us forward into the right one." He looked at her. "We thought we were riding to get something back. Turns out what we got was different from what we went looking for." Haley looked at the road. She looked at the underpass and the sky above it, which was the same sky as a year ago and had no particular message in it, except that it was there and wide and cold and indifferent. The way the desert always is, offering nothing, taking nothing, simply surrounding whatever chooses to happen within it. She thought about the teenager who had come in off the street on opening day and eaten the eggs and stayed for 3 hours and come back the following Saturday and the Saturday after that, and who was, as of last week, enrolled in a GED program at the community college with a scholarship referral that OC had helped her apply for. She thought about Clara Betts and the intake form and Doc's Wednesday health check-ins and Nathan's truck in the parking lot every other weekend. She thought about the cracked phone behind the glass and the card beneath it and the particular weight of a waterproof bag carried through 8 months of cold nights by a person who decided that the truth was worth keeping even when nobody was ready to receive it. She thought about running into the road. She said, "I don't think I saved you." Grant looked at her. She said, I think I stopped you from destroying yourselves. That's different. The saving you did that yourselves. By stopping. By turning around. By not giving Rourke the version of you that he was counting on. She looked at him. I gave you information. You chose what to do with it. I can't take credit for the choice. Grant said, I don't think we'd put it that way. She said, I know, but it matters how we put it. Because if the story is that you rescued me, then I'm the girl who needed rescuing, and that's the end of it. And if the story is that we each gave the other something the other was missing, she paused, then it's a different kind of story. One that doesn't end. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Owen said, from somewhere in the group, she's right. And Switch said, she usually is. And Doc said, that tracks. And Rivet said nothing, which from Rivet was agreement of the most complete kind. Grant looked at Haley for a long moment. He had spent 49 years learning to read situations accurately, and he was reading this one, and what he read was a 20-year-old woman who had arrived at a clarity about herself and the people around that most people spent entire lifetimes approaching without reaching. He said, then it's a story that doesn't end. She said, no, it doesn't. She turned back toward the road, back toward Mara's truck, back toward the diner that was waiting at the other end of the drive, with its door that locked and its counter that was always warm and its resource station and its 9-question intake form and the Saturday morning that was already beginning to take shape in the next 16 hours. She had somewhere to be. She had work in the morning. She had a teenage girl who was going to show up at 10 o'clock and need help with a scholarship essay. And an older man who was coming in for the first time and would be terrified and would need someone to sit across from him and not ask the wrong questions. She had a brother who would call on Sunday the way he had been calling every Sunday for 6 months, not to ask for forgiveness, but to stay in the habit of showing up, which was its own form of love, imperfect, constructed, worth having. She had a room above the diner with a door that locked and a window that caught the morning light and a desk where she had been working 3 nights a week through a community college program in social services that she would finish in 14 months, and that would make her, officially and documentably, the things she had been doing since the day she sat down across from that first teenager and put a plate of food between them. She had 23 pages of handwritten notes that had changed everything, and the knowledge that she had made one mistake and had told the truth about it anyway, and the certainty, not faith certainty, built on evidence that the truth spoken clearly into the right room at the right moment could move things that looked immovable. She had all of this. A year ago, she had run into a road with nothing left and everything to lose and no particular expectation that it would matter. It had mattered. It had mattered in the way that the right thing done at the right moment matters not loudly, not cleanly, not without cost, but permanently. The way a thing that is true stays true after the moment that proved it has passed. She got in the truck. Mara started the engine. Behind them, 22 engines started in sequence, the same sound as a year ago. The same cold air, the same Nevada dark, except that everything that happened inside that sound and that cold and that dark was different now, had been different since the night a girl ran into the road, and 22 men had the presence of mind to stop. As the truck pulled away, Haley looked once in the side mirror at the line of headlights behind her, the same 22, following at a distance, the way they had followed her that first night from Mar's kitchen and every direction since that had mattered. She looked forward. The road ahead was lit and clear and long, and she drove toward it without flinching, without looking back again, without needing to. She had already seen enough of where she came from to know exactly where she was going. And she was going there with her eyes open, her hands steady, and the absolute unshakable certainty of a woman who had run out of everything once and discovered, on the other side of that, that she had only just begun.